across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome to the show. I'm still plugging in my earpiece. Would you believe that? Sometimes when you do the handover on this show, you've got to be swift, and Ian Collins and I were still discussing the goose eggs as he left the studio and I began. But don't you worry, it seems to me I'm all plugged into the main board now. And so away we go. Right, welcome to the show. This is Alex Phillips staying with you until 7 o'clock tonight, sitting in for the inimitable Jeremy Kyle, who I understand is doing some sort of charity golf match somewhere. So good luck, my son, and if you win, give it to Needy Course, would you? Right, there's lots coming up on the show today. We've got that breaking news, of course, about the plans for prisons, and that is off the back of learning that in male prisons there are basically no more spaces left come November. So you've now got a situation where people are only going to serve 1/3 of their sentences, and frankly, oiks and ne'er-do-wells are going to be chucked out onto the streets willy-nilly just to make space for more people. How are we so woefully behind what is going wrong with the justice system? We're also going to be talking about, well, that Starmer speech, which he's now getting slammed, not for his Damascene conversion, that all of a sudden he believes in controlling borders after saying most immigration laws, frankly, actually quite racist. But he's now being slammed for the language he used, with accusations that he nicked a chunk of it from Enoch Powell. Do you believe that? I don't believe that. I think people are hypersensitive and will look for scandal wherever they want, particularly when it comes to these sorts of taboo debates. It's far easier to go after language than allow us to actually have the conversation about controlling our borders. We're going to be discussing that because, of course, his wokery-in-chief, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is the latest to bash his boss over the language used. Also, what on earth is going on with Sir Keir Starmer's former houses that have been firebombed and the connections to a hostile state? Pretty worrying times, and MP's safety, I mean, when you read stuff like this, it does make you worry very much for security of those people, whether you love them or loathe them, but who do the job of representing us in Parliament. Donald Trump has arrived in Qatar. I don't know if you have seen the pictures. Pretty astonishing stuff. Those dudes in Doha, they certainly know how to roll out the red carpet. Or in this case, they're actually using a fleet of cyber trucks to create the most extreme sort of 21st century motorcade that you can even imagine. Look at it. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the pictures right now. No half measures in Doha, I'll tell you that much. But what's he up to over there? He's had a big old handshake deal over in Saudi Arabia, going to sell them a lot of weaponry. Now he's over in Qatar, who, of course, position themselves as negotiators between Israel and Hamas. Hamas headquarters, of course, in Doha. But some say it's the CIA themselves who asked the Qatari state to allow the terrorist kingpins to set up shop there, so America keep a beady eye on them. So much to talk about today, and if you want to add your voice to the chorus, the number is 03444991000. That is charged at your normal network rate. You can call at any point and register your interest to join the conversation, and one of my wonderful producers will give you a call back and get you on air as and when we are going to be taking calls. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send us a text message. Remember, if you're going to go down the SMS route, you need to write the word talk before you text. You can also send me a WhatsApp. That is also on the 03444991000 number, and leave me a voice note on WhatsApp if your thumbs are too lazy to do the typing. We're on X at talkTV. And after that rather bumpy start to the programme, where I suddenly looked up and saw myself reflected back at me and heard music faintly in the distance and realised we were on air while I was still plugging in my earpiece, to find out that I had been messing around without knowing that the eyes of the world were watching, to soothe my woes and to make sure that I stay in lane from now on, is Andy Williams, political commentator. Thank you ever so much for being here.
Good to see you.
After all the years I've been here presenting, I've never actually done that. I've always been sat here waiting, poised, eyes down the barrel for the green light.
First time for everything, and it's such a beautiful day outside today. It's easy to get distracted looking to your left-hand side.
I know, it's a great view from Talk Towers, isn't it? Oh, look at the lovely Tower of London. I can think of a few people I've put in that. Right, let's get on to this really horrific story that's come out during the course of the day, that a prison guard has now had his throat slashed by an inmate in what is another horror attack taking place in a high-security prison. Of course, we know that Axel Rudakabana threw boiling water over a prison guard. Just before that, the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber managed to get hold of, was it hot oil? And now a prison guard has actually had their throat slashed by an inmate. This is in HMP Woodhill in Milton Keynes, which happens to be the prison where Tommy Robinson is currently being held, having been moved from Belmarsh. But you do have to wonder what is going on in our prisons. They seem to be run by gangs. They seem to be utterly lawless at this point.
They do, and I think we need to distinguish firstly between the people in our prisons who we need to be working not just to punish, and that's why they're there in the first place, but also to rehabilitate them. And there are many people in our prisons who are capable of rehabilitation and who could come out and actually lead successful, meaningful lives. But we also have to accept that there are some of them who won't. And as I understand it, the person who committed this attack today is detained under the Terrorism Act.
Right.
So the chances are that this is somebody who's probably not likely to
who may well be
rehabilitated.
motivated by a particular viewpoint.
Yeah, a particular viewpoint, whatever that is. And I don't know, I'm not an expert on the prison system, but what is absolutely clear is that it's completely broken. And this government has a really significant opportunity, and actually an imperative, to completely, from the ground up, reform our justice system. And we've seen in, I think, the last few minutes, an announcement that Labour is going to build 3 prisons a year, every year over the course of this Parliament. That's long overdue. We had 14 years of a government that didn't build, it barely built any prison places, despite constantly announcing programmes to build prison places. So clearly we need that to happen, but that's only one piece of the puzzle. It's not just about space, although, as you said at the top, there kind of is no space left, or almost no space left, which is remarkable. That is forcing a government, and what an invidious position to be in. It's forcing a government into a position where they're having to look at the people in our prisons and decide who is the least dangerous, what's the least dangerous cohort of people to release.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be in that position, but what's the alternative?
But this is the thing, you know, whenever the government feels that they want to move quickly, they can. When it came to the trials of people in the Southport riots, they managed to rush them all through pretty quickly and stick them on telly box for the world to watch. When it came to COVID, we had Nightingale courts then and Nightingale hospitals. And you ask yourself, well, how do we get to a situation when it's quite clear people in the civil service know what the prison capacity is, they know that it's woefully understaffed, but also the rising threat of violence? Why aren't prison guards better protected? Why aren't they better armed?
I really don't. I honestly don't know. I really, really don't know the answer to that. But clearly, we know, we've heard all sorts of anecdote. I don't have the stats, but there's all sorts of anecdotal evidence about, you talk about gangs in prisons, about prisons that are run basically by gangs selling drugs, people smuggling weapons into prisons. How is that happening? And is it a question of looking again at the job of a prison officer or a prison guard and better incentive? I don't know what an average prison guard is paid, for example, but I imagine it's not brilliant. Maybe we need to be paying those people more, training them better, having more of them. The problem is, the solution to so many of these problems with our broken public services is more money.
But, you know, someone said to me the other day, and I can't remember who, but I thought it sounded like a very sensible policy. Why don't we use army veterans to go and staff prisons? You know, give them a role
well,
there.
if they want to do that.
If they wanted to.
If they want to.
But it does seem to me that, do you know, I must admit, part of me thinks that a lot of the problems we're now facing, we reap what we sow, is all part of this sort of be kind movement, where prison has to be as comfortable as it is to live in the outside world, that people have to have access to kitchens and PlayStations and televisions. I mean, look, we don't know anything about this case. You can fashion a blade from all sorts of innocuous materials. But certainly when you know, going back to the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber and the fact that he managed to cook up his cocktail of injury in a kitchen, why on earth has he got access to a kitchen?
I don't think it's to do with being soft on people or anything like that at all. I think this is about a long period of, a decade and a half plus of underinvestment in a public service. That's what it comes down to. We're clearly not investing in the staff, in training, in salaries, in building these prisons. If you want a prison system that works, and what does a prison system that works look like? It looks like deterring people. it looks like punishing them appropriately, and it looks like rehabilitating as many of them as you can. And we know that Britain has, I think, the highest prison population in Europe. It has one of the highest reoffending rates. I mean, those are two very important metrics on which we're completely failing. So I don't think it's about being too soft or too kind. I think it's about massive underinvestment.
I mean, what we also know is that 10% of our prison population are foreign born, and there'll be people out there who are saying, why are we putting them up at His Majesty's pleasure at the cost of 40 odd grand a year minimum when we know we don't have enough enough prison spaces? Why are these people not being sent back to their home countries?
So I don't think that's the right thing to do, but I do think that going forward as part of this immigration white paper, which, by the way, I think contains, maybe we can talk about the rhetoric in a bit, but that I think it contains a number of very sensible measures in that paper. One thing, I think it's Sweden, but I might have got the wrong Scandinavian country, have just introduced a law that says you can only come into this country from elsewhere as an immigrant, as a legal immigrant, if you don't have a criminal record, if you have a clean bill of health. That just, I think the vast majority of people would think that is a sensible thing to do.
You'd wonder why that wasn't in place already.
It's amazing. I mean, and actually I've talked on this show before about how I didn't know until one of Reform's 5 MPs entered Parliament with a conviction for domestic violence that you could become an MP and have been to prison, but it turns out you can. So just if we're we should set that standard for MPs, we should set that standard for people who come into our country as well.
Although, hold on, you were talking about the rehabilitation of prisoners. When it comes to James McMurdoch, who I know, and he seems to be a lovely man, who's very repentful over what happened when he was, years ago, when he was essentially a teen and he did 2 weeks in a youth detention centre, and he's turned his life around. He's a married man with 5 kids, was a very successful, worker, and I think in the City of London. And so surely, actually, when it comes to a positive rehabilitation story and representation, that should be perfectly okay.
So I don't know James McMurdoch, so I can't comment on his character, but what I would say is that we have to hold our politicians to a higher standard. Now, we shouldn't be writing people off and saying, well, you can't have a career anymore, and as you say, he's had a successful career in the city or whatever, but I do think that if you have a criminal record, that should disbar you from entering Parliament.
Certainly when it comes to allowing people into the country, you would think you'd want to do a background check, so you know who they are, what they might be here planning to do. You said that you saw a lot of good stuff in the immigration white paper, so let's talk about that before we get on to talking about the language, because having looked through it myself, what struck me is where they were able to make some plans or put forward concrete proposals. They've done this. It's the sort of mood music you've heard before, and I don't know how efficient it's going to be at significantly bringing down numbers. On a lot of the stuff that people really do care about, there was just no structure of delivery. You know, when they spoke about we're going to sort of stop the blocking of deportations for stupid reasons. Okay, how? By what mechanism? Because unless you're going to rescind power from the ECHR and the Supreme Court and pluck out a load of case precedent and potentially the Human Rights Act, I don't quite understand how that's going to be done. And then also lip service being paid to things such as integration. Okay, how?
Well, on integration, I think we clearly need a proper strategy. I don't believe that multiculturalism is a failed experiment. I think it can work, but I think you can't just let it happen, or you can't just hope it's going to happen. There needs to be initiatives in place that actually facilitate and foster that.
Like what?
Well, I'm not a government. I'm not doing government policy in the Home Office. But if I was, I'm pretty sure I'd have a team of people working on that full time. I think that's really important.
But this is the problem. They that was one of their 5 big take homes. And if you're there living in a city in the UK, like in Leicester, where in some parts of Leicester, more than half of the population don't even speak English, you live in a neighbourhood that's become balkanised.
And Starmer, by the way, in his speech, he spoke about saying, a fundamental, a kind of base level prerequisite for coming to the UK should be you should be able to speak the language.
Right. But then it doesn't really go that far to explain what you're going to do when it comes to neighbourhoods where there is no community cohesion. And frankly, there's not particularly any will for community cohesion, because if people can come to this country, live as an economic migrant without learning the language, with people from their own backgrounds. And today, in this day and age, with the power of Zoom and with mobile phones and with the internet and television, you can watch the news from back home, you can communicate with your family from back home, you can eat the food from back home. home. There's no real challenge to have to try and integrate. And I say this frankly, as somebody who has lived abroad a lot myself, and in countries where I could integrate, countries like Ghana, like Kenya, like India even, where I became very much a fabric of where I lived, great. But when I lived in China, I didn't speak any Chinese.
Right.
And very few people in Shanghai can speak English. And also the cultures are so different. There wasn't really a sort of going out and have a drink after work culture. And so naturally I found a load of other people who were there teaching English as a foreign language. And so what do you end up doing? You end up going to somewhere that you know because it's, you know, something crudely based on a UK pub with the other Brits.
Of course, and I don't.
It's normal and human to want to do that, but it's not very constructive.
It's not. I don't think we can go as far as we can't force people to live their lives in a particular way. But what we can do is ensure that, for example, if you're coming to this country with a family, you make sure your children go to school, and particularly your daughters, which we know doesn't happen all the time. But
would you agree with faith schools? Because I think they need to be abolished, because that to me seems segregation of children at a very young age based on religion.
I'm not in favour of faith schools of any kind. I'm not. I went to a Church of England primary school. It was very chilled, liberal type place, but I'm still not in favour of it. I don't think we should have any schools that say this is actually the guiding light, and I'm not in favour of that at all.
I'd keep Church of England and Catholic schools because it's a religion of this country.
But I don't know how you can. I don't know how. I think that's a really tricky argument to make. I think you either have a problem with faith schools.
No.
Or you
can have a problem with faith schools which aren't the nation's faith. I think it's perfectly adequate to say this is a country for 2,000 years that's been built on Judeo-Christian values, and we want to uphold that because it's the glue that held our society together. Now, look, most schools back in the day, I don't know what goes on in schools now, but had religious-themed school assemblies, but it didn't turn people into sort of Christian zealots. It was just part of the fabric of the teaching of the school. And I saw no harm in that, and I don't see anything wrong with being able to say that's our nation. In the same way, if you went to Saudi Arabia or a Muslim country, they might have Muslim-themed schools, but they wouldn't have a Christian school or a Hindu school.
Very different society, and we know that Britain is pretty much a secular nation these days, right? Like we know that if you look at Christianity, for example, I don't know what the latest stats are, but not many people are going to church. It's not a massively prevalent part of our society. Of course, it is around. You know, we organise the calendar around it, we organise holidays around it, and that's important.
Our democracy is based on it. Our morality is based on it. Our views of women's and then their rights are based on it.
But I would say, you know, you either have faith schools and you allow people to set up faith schools across all faiths, or you don't. And I'm in favour of not having them.
I don't see why we have to suddenly make all other religions and cultures equal to our own domestic one. I think you can quite happily promote and celebrate and maintain your own culture as a country without having to put all others from, you know, foreign climes on an equal footing. To me, that makes no sense.
Not really about that for me. It's more about, is it a good idea, or is it ideal to stratify children in that way by saying this is the thing you all need to believe, these are the teachings you need, and don't listen to these because it's only this. I'm not massively in favour of that. But to come back to the immigration white paper, what I thought was, in terms of the measures that are in it, what I thought was positive about it is that so much of the chat and the rhetoric about immigration in this country is about small boats. And I understand why people are particularly exercised about that, because it's illegal migration and we don't know where these people are coming from, and we know that it's expensive to put them up when they come here, etc., etc. All the things that are discussed all the time. But that's only 4.8% of migration into Britain. 95% of migration every year into Britain, or at least last year, was legal migration.
Right.
And if I remember rightly, when we had the Brexit referendum, one of the major drivers of that Brexit vote was that there was a significant group of people, clearly majority of people in this country, who thought, actually, we've let too many people in over too long a period of time, and it started to alter the fabric of our country. And last year, 720,000 net migration. It's an enormous number, and before that, I think it was 900.
Yeah,
and before
insane.
that, it was about 700 again. So in the last 3 years, 2 million new people net have come into Britain. But we're not talking about the Brexit deal that Boris Johnson did that actually increased net migration massively. We focus all of our attention on small boats. This white paper is about saying the amount of legal migration, and this is Labour, by the way. Labour are saying, Labour that's always been the party of migration, basically.
Yeah.
We know that Blair was very in favour of it. I'm a Blairite. I'm in favour of it. But most people aren't. So Labour has shifted massively its position. And one thing I found very strange over the past 48 hours is all of the people who've been bashing Starmer and Yvette Cooper for years and saying they're too soft, they're too this, too that. The moment they actually come out with a rhetoric that is totally in line with those people's views, they still don't like it. It's almost as though they'll never give Keir Starmer credit for anything.
Arguably, though, the biggest backlash has actually come from within his own party, with people saying, we don't like the words that you use, particularly when he discussed the island of strangers. Now, whoever started this saying, did this come from Enoch Powell's speech? I doubt that. You know, I really don't believe his speechwriter sat there and went, oh, I know, let's comb through the rivers of blood speech, take out passages and reword them. Why would they? I just can't see any upside why anyone would do that.
I know people who work in Keir Starmer's team and around Keir Starmer's team, and trust me, they are not reading Enoch Powell's speeches.
But this is the mad thing. They're all jumping up now, aren't they? The usual suspects going, this is hateful language, it's divisive, it's going to make people feel very upset. What? Talking about island of strangers. We cannot do anything about immigration without some Egypt turning around and saying, this is racist, this is xenophobic, watch your language. That's what really sticks in my craw. And frankly, the London mayor should put a sock in it and remember he might be in charge of London, but he's not running that Labour Party, and he should actually show an iota of party discipline rather than jumping on the bandwagon and attacking the Prime Minister.
Well, Sadiq has a long track record of using his kind of independence from Westminster to criticise the Labour leadership and the Labour government, you know, as he sees fit. And Andy Burnham does the same, by the way. Burnham, who I think is a massively overrated politician.
I always thought he seemed like one of the better ones. Is it?
Is disingenuous, I think. But anyway, that's a whole different debate. But they use their independence to intervene when they want to. I broadly agree with Sadiq Khan here, in the sense that, as I say, I think there were lots of important measures in that paper. I think they're sensible. I think you will see immigration come down as a result.
So what are you agreeing with Sadiq Khan?
Well, he said they're not the words I'd use. And I do agree with that, because I think language in politics really matters. And I both not quite morally, but in terms of, I don't think that language. I find it slightly unedifying.
I just cannot, in a million years, even if I really exercise myself, even if I really try and understand what is divisive about island of strangers, I can't find anything in it. We're an island, yes, and if people don't know each other because they're not saying hello to each other on the street, they're strangers. What is so divisive about saying island of strangers?
I just think it's unnecessary, and it's a bit exclusionary.
It's words.
And I think it's but words matter, and language matters in politics. It does. But putting that aspect to one side, I actually think strategically, from a political standpoint, I think this is mad politics, because what's very transparent. I mean, the immigration white paper was always coming. So people who said, oh, they're only rushing this out now because of the local election results. Right. I mean, you don't understand politics.
Yeah.
That's just, you don't rush a white paper out in 9 days. That's not how it works. This was always coming. But the language and the rhetoric, undoubtedly, is driven by reform and its surging popularity.
And Nigel Farage. Of strangers.
But it is exactly the sort of thing Farage would say.
I wake up every day. I think it's quite a nice turn of phrase.
What?
You know, we don't want to be an island of strangers. I wake up every day and the goalposts have moved as to what is acceptable and what isn't. And all the while, we've got the whole assisted dying bill going through Parliament and being discussed. And everyone just talks about dignity in dying without mentioning we don't fund hospices, instead of saying this is state-sanctioned killing.
But I don't think Sadiq Khan, and this is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's unacceptable or disgraceful or racist or xenophobic, which some people are on the left. They absolutely are on the hard left. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I think it's a bit unnecessary, pretty unpalatable. I wouldn't have said it. But also I'm saying strategically, from a political standpoint, it doesn't make sense.
I'm really struggling, Andy, right? And I think you're such a bright man and such a nice man that I just want someone to explain to me. Because have I gone mad that I'm the only person sitting here who cannot see that there's anything, even if I try hard, anything wrong with Island of Strangers? Can you explain to me why that's upsetting people?
It depends on your view of society. Some people think we're all just we're atomised. We're all just a bunch of individuals who should go about our own business, sink or swim. You know, if you have a terrible life, nearly swore there, shouldn't do that. If you have a terrible life, it's your own fault. Tough. And if you're a migrant, tough. And actually, I've seen footage in the last few days.
But surely he's pointing out that's what we don't want to be. He's saying we don't want to be. We've become an island of strangers, and we shouldn't be. So yeah. What's wrong with that?
Because it doesn't speak to a society that a centre-left politician should want to build, which is
so what should he have said instead?
Well, I just don't think he should have said that. I think he should.
Island of Strangers.
I think he should. I think rather than these kind of slightly dodgy, ill-thought-through sound bites, I think we need to be making an argument about, on economic terms, on societal terms, about why we need cohesion, integration, and a shared sense of purpose. He could have said, what we need is a shared sense of purpose. That's not brilliant rhetoric. I've come up with it off the top of my head. But it's better than saying, oh, you know, we risk. I just think it's a bit gross.
I'm afraid, Andy, you haven't convinced me
we're coming
at
at
all.
things from very different perspectives, Alex.
I still don't get, you know, of all the things, all the words that people could be upset about, I still don't get
why
anyone would be upset about
I've heard far worse things said in politics. Don't get me wrong. It's by no means.
Far worse things said to me on X on a regular basis.
You can see my feed.
by a platform of strangers hiding behind a stranger avatars. That's all I've got you for, isn't it?
That's it.
Oh, it's brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much for joining me, and don't be a stranger.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, see what I did there.
Appreciate it. Very good.
Boom, boom. That's where they pay me the big bucks. Now, listen, if you want to... Don't be a stranger yourself. If you want to make this island of strangers an opportunity for communal catharsis with a shared purpose and a shared identity, then you can join the conversation by dialing 03444 99 1000. It's charged at your normal network rate, which means it's the same as it costs to phone and get a pizza tonight. Don't do that, because you had one last night, didn't you? So perhaps you should try some nice home-cooked salmon fillet. 8722 is the number to text. Write the word talk before your message. We're on X at talkTV, and your calls and messages coming up after this.
We know that over the past 3 years he's been on countless foreign jet-setting luxury trips around the world at our expense. He says it's to, foster relations with foreign countries and to tell them how wrong Russia was to invade Ukraine. I'm not sure what that has got to do with the speaker, but there you are. He spent about £300,000 over the last 3 years going on these luxury trips.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Time for your messages and your calls. First of all, Steve in Cambridge says, good afternoon, Alex, you wonderful creature. I like that. You know I like the word creature. You're a regular, aren't you? Mum used to serve up goose eggs. I found them filling, but wasn't keen on the taste. But if it was put in front of you as a kid, eat it or else. Lovely to see you midweek. Oh, thanks. Nice to be here midweek. I did, of course, make a very spurious claims that goose eggs are a sort of a sop for all sorts of diseases. You know, the Daily Mail might say that, but, you know, don't go eating 85 eggs a day. I mean, do what you like, frankly speaking. I'm no dietitian, but we're not having to do some sort of Edwina Curry British egg board adverts here. But there you are. I like eggs. Some people don't. Some people do. And goose eggs, I don't think they taste funny at all. They just taste like normal eggs, just bigger, more yolk. Overcrowded prisons just send foreign prisoners to their own country to serve their sentence. Right. What? It's so obvious. I wish the government would build secure detention centres in which to keep migrants. This would save us millions and I think would be a deterrent, says Maggie in Cheshire. Well, actually, this is the thing, Maggie. I reckon a secure detention centre would probably cost more than sticking them in hotels or sticking them in private rental accommodation. But at the same time, why on earth are they here in the first place? Why are we just sort of saying, oh, well, since you managed to break in, you may as well stay? Can you imagine waking up bump in the night and sort of burglar bills come in, sniffing around your sort of jewellery box, and you go, oh, hello, as you broke in, do you fancy a cup of tea? It's just... Alex, we have the same problem with police. It's not simply underinvestment. They lay off all the highly paid, experienced officers and prison staff to employ wet behind the ears university leavers who have no experience other than what they've been taught in the lefty education system. That's from Michelle. I mean, look, I don't know. I've never worked in a prison. I've never really had any brushes with prisons. I don't know much about them. But what is quite clear from successive reports talking about gang kingpins, drug lords, sending drones of sort of, you know, narcotics into prisons very easily, having their guy on the inside. And then you've heard about, you know, the Muslim extremist Islamist gangs who are running certain prisons. This is the third attack against a prison officer in almost as many weeks. And you think to yourself, what is going on? Clearly, the system's not working, and I feel desperately sorry for this prison officer who is just going to work, probably not paid particularly much, probably not, you know, having a whale of the time in his role, if it is a he, one assumes it is, I don't know, and then being attacked and having his throat sliced. They required stitches and surgical glue to their injuries, so hopefully it doesn't sound like it was too horrific in terms of the actual material effects of that attack. And meanwhile, at Gartree Prison, so the first one happened at HMP Woodhill by a prisoner detained under the Terrorism Act. Meanwhile, at Gartree Prison in Markets Harbour, staff attended a medical emergency where a prisoner faked an epileptic fit. A prison officer who attended to assist was assaulted, had a TV thrown at him, and a female officer sustained a broken arm. It's just, no wonder recruitment's so difficult into that sector. Let's speak now to Michael, who is in Middlesbrough. Hi there, Michael.
Hiya, how are you? You okay?
I'm all right, my love. How are you and how's Middlesbrough?
Well, I'm actually in Leeds at the minute. I'm working.
How are you?
Yeah. It's hot.
Is it? Good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know. That's always a positive, isn't it?
I was listening. I've been listening and on about early release scheme for prisoners. Now, I served a long time in prison, and I think that, like, the government, like, they're doing this to ease overcrowding. Now, they're releasing people that they shouldn't be released, really, in my eyes. They should say, you know, anyone who hits a woman or child or anything like that, they should stay in prison until they've served their sentence. They shouldn't be allowed early release.
Yeah.
But that's my opinion.
Michael, do you mind if look, you can say no, but it's not very often I get to speak to someone who said to me, I served myself in prison. So I just wanted to, if you're happy talking a little bit about your experience in prison. So how long do you mind me asking how long you were in for?
21 years.
Blimmin' heck, that's a stint, isn't it, son?
Yeah, half. Just like.
Okay. Do you want to talk about what you were? You don't have to. It's your private business.
No, I've talked to Peter before about it. I was involved in the lifestyle. I was involved in it was drugs, gangs. A man ended up getting killed. I was responsible. I got found guilty on the trial, and I went away for 21 years. That was I got released on the 23rd of December 2019.
How old were you when you were sent down?
28.
Wow, so a great deal of your adult life was spent behind bars.
I'm 54 in June. I've got a 3-year-old daughter now.
Yeah.
I bought my own house. I've been working from day one that since I've got out.
Well, good. Well done to you, can I say?
Yeah.
I love hearing stories of rehabilitation and people sorting out their lives. I think that is what prison's about. Now, tell me about what it was like inside prison, because, like I said, I don't have any experience of prison. I've never been in Clink.
Not nice. When at some points, it was all right, but when... Well, it isn't all right because you're away from your family.
Yeah.
I think
but
prison
did you have to share a cell or something like that, or...?
Yeah, to begin with, I did.
Yeah.
And then I got put on high risk because I had a fallout with one or two inmates when I was banged up with them, and we had a fight. I won't go into detail. And then they put me high risk, and ever since then, I was single cell. But normally, when you go to Cat A's like this, Ruba Cabani and that other one, that Manchester bomber, I think he was on a Cat A unit, a prison within a prison.
Right.
So basically, they're away from everybody else, and there might be 6-8 inmates on that, and they get let out to cook food and like stuff like that. So
what's it like? I mean, look, when you're in prison, are you sort of just sitting in a cell twiddling your thumbs for most of the day? Are you sort of, do you have access to entertainment? Do you have a good relationship with the screws?
Yeah, I did. And actually, I've got friends now that are prison officers that I actually work with. That's with this company. They're ex-prison officers. And I actually know the governors from certain prisons.
Yeah.
I've got a good rapport with them. I see prison officers now when I'm out shopping. That's with my partner and my daughter when we go to Newcastle, Costco, and I bump into them. And, I ask how they're doing, I ask how I'm doing, and... I've been to see one or two people that since I've been out that I was pretty close with. They've ended up in prison, and when I went back to my local prison, all the prisoners know me, and they come over to me, the prison officers, and how you doing? Oh God, you look fine, blah. And I tell them how I'm doing, my daughter, and it's really nice to see that they want the best for you.
But when you hear these reports of gangs in prison, drugs kingpins on the outside world sending drones in with narcotics, Islamists running certain things, these horrific attacks against prison officers, did you ever see anything like that in your time, or is there something that's markedly changed recently?
I've seen loads of stuff like that. I've seen actually when I was in Parkhurst, there was a fight escalation that was downstairs, and it got that bad. The lad ran upstairs, had a heart attack, and died outside my cell.
Wow.
Because he was fighting and he just had a heart attack. Obviously, it was through the fight, and obviously I've seen people stabbed up. I've seen people with hot oil on the face, where the faces have come off. You know what I mean? They've actually come off. That's with the oil. It's burnt them that much, and it's horrible to see. But it happens. It's prison, and you could look at someone the wrong way. So these things happen. Prison officers, most prison officers that I've come across, they do the job, and they're there for the prisoners to make sure their life's a lot easier. Than that's what it is, because they understand. You're away from your family, you're locked up, you might be stressed, depressed. They go out the way to help you. But sometimes that officer that helps people, he gets inundated with applications of prisoners when they get opened up in the morning. Everyone goes to that officer,
Right.
Because they know
He's the nice
he'll
one.
do it. Yeah, he's the nice one, and sometimes the nice ones they get attacked
Right.
because the ones that they don't want to do anything for anybody, and like the Mr. No-Nos, they don't get approached by the prisoners.
Yeah.
Because they know it's going to be a no. So when the officers that do try to help people, when they get inundated, sometimes they'll forget about they want the phone call, they want letting out for the gym, so they'll get the door open and they think it's against them, and then they'll attack the officers.
Gosh.
I've seen it happen. You know what I mean? I've seen it happen. It is bad. It is bad. I don't think they get paid enough, to be honest with you.
Michael, thank you so much for your candour and your insight. I mean, like I said, it's not very often I get to speak to someone who's just been as open about all your life experiences and what it's really like inside prison. That's been a really valuable conversation to have. That was Michael in Middlesbrough. What a wonderful opportunity to hear of someone who's turned his life around. Now a father of a 3-year-old girl. You could tell how proud he is. Mentioned it about 5 times, didn't he? That's a doting dad for you. At work in Leeds today, and good on Michael. That is what the whole system is supposed to produce, Michaels. Right, OK, we're going to go to a short break now. Don't go anywhere, because we're going to be picking up on the story of the firebombs against Sir Keir Starmer's properties have been linked to a hostile state. What is going on? That's after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. I'm really not doing well with my timings today. There I was chewing on a piece of charcuterie, honestly. Right, welcome back to the show. And without further ado, let's speak now to Major General Chip Chapman, Senior British Military Advisor to US Central Command and former head of counter-terrorism and UK operations in the MOD. Chip, great to have you on the programme. What is going on with the reports that these arson attacks against Sir Keir Starmer's former properties, well, still owned by him, but he's not in residence in them, and a vehicle, could be connected to a hostile state?
Well, I think you have to put the could be in front of everything there. So you follow the evidence and you follow the threat. So let's look at the possibilities here in terms of that one. Now, we know, for example, that in America last November, there was an arraignment of an Iranian plot to kill President Trump before he came to power. We know also recently that the Iranians have had 20 plots in the UK in the last few years. And indeed, the amount of activity that MI5 have put towards state actors, the threat is 48% at the moment. In the 22-23 Intelligence Security Committee report, it was 18%. So more effort is being put against state threats. It could be that this was a state actor, but to my mind, it looks so shoddily executed, and the forensic fingerprints that they left means that this is pretty amateur. Now, it could be that, of course, that they used a criminal proxy, and a pretty bad one if it was a state actor, to perpetrate this. So I would probably say that on the balance of probability at the moment, this is either a disgruntled individual or someone from the left who thinks that Starmer is too far right, or someone from the right who thinks that Starmer is too far left. I don't think this is a major plot in terms of the statecraft and tradecraft of a high-end organised state organisation.
Yeah, do you know, I must admit that was my feelings looking at it all. I was just like, really, if this was state-backed, all they've done is light a bonfire in the door, not to undermine the seriousness of it, but, you know, light a fire in the doorway of a property that the Prime Minister's not even in. It seemed a bit sort of woeful. Now, talking about the Middle East, let's segue from Iran to Qatar, because that is where Donald Trump has found himself today on the second leg of his 4-day Middle Eastern tour. He signed a big old deal with Saudi Arabia, an arms deal. Plenty to talk about in Qatar as well, considering they were the interlocutors when it came to trying to negotiate a ceasefire with Hamas. What is the significance of Donald Trump? Seems to be kind of at home in the Middle East. He likes doing diplomacy there. They've got all the bells and whistles. It's also, I understand, one of the biggest American air bases aboard with, is it 10,000 troops in Qatar? What is the significance of his visit to the Middle East? What do you think we're going to see come out as a result of this?
Well, he also went to the Middle East as the first visit on his first presidency. So, you know, Donald Trump is a guy who wants to make deals. He also wants to be someone who's seen as a peacemaker, someone who stops wars and doesn't get into wars. So both his Middle East visit, in terms of both the trade parts and in terms of trying to unlock the wider problem of the Middle East, and that's not just Hamas, of course. By the end of May, he hopes to have done some sort of deal with the Iranians, and that may unlock what has been the Shia-Sunni problem really since 1979 with the Iranian Revolution. That will be difficult to do in a global sense, I think, in the Middle East. I don't think he can unlock the Hamas thing urgently either. But I think President Trump believes in the great man theory of international relations. That is, that just one man like him can talk to a few other chiefs, and suddenly that unlocks the potential for the future. That's not really how the international system works, and there needs to be a lot of process and procedure in the background, which is why he turns up and signs things. You don't just suddenly have a $124 billion defense package which is signed by the Saudis. You know, you have to do a lot of preparatory work for that. That is why also there won't be any great deal should he go to Istanbul tomorrow, thinking that there will be some denouement in the Russia-Ukraine war. I don't think there will be a denouement on that. There's still a lot of patient negotiation that must go on there. There's still a chasm analysis really between what Russia want and what Ukraine will require, and trying to narrow that gap is still a really big problem for negotiators to do.
Yeah, I mean, all eyes on Trump at the moment. You were, of course, talking about going over to Istanbul. He says Putin wants me at those peace talks. Well, let's see what happens. I always get the impression at the moment that Russia's rather playing the President of America. Major General Chip Chapman, thank you ever so much for joining me on the programme. Right, we're going to take another advert break now, but when I come back, we're going to be talking about the fact that the government's immigration crackdown could actually have unwanted consequences. Well, that's according to the Nurses Union, who says it could fuel an exodus of sisters from wards. We're going to be discussing that after this.
We know that over the past 3 years, he's been on countless foreign jet-setting luxury trips around the world at our expense. He says it's to, foster relations with foreign countries and to tell them how wrong Russia was to invade Ukraine. I'm not sure what that has got to do with the Speaker, but there you are. He spent about £300,000 over the last 3 years going on these luxury trips.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Now, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the story about the government white paper on immigration and a crackdown trying to bring down those numbers of people who have come into the country legally, not just about we're going to stop the boats, but we're going to, well, cut 100,000 off the inward migration numbers. And as high as they are, I'm not sure 100,000 is really much of a chink in the armour. But the Nurses Union, the RCN, has warned that these crackdowns could threaten NHS and care services. This is based on the fact that 42% of migrant nurses who were surveyed plans to leave the UK soon and cited pay and immigration policies as the top reasons. And most nurses leaving won't come back, preferring other Western nations to work in. How big a risk is this? Let's speak now to Martin Gower, who's a former NHS chair. Martin, great to have you on the programme. I don't think we're alone in the world, are we? When it comes to the struggle of recruiting nurses, Australia's had to have big recruitment drives. Many countries in the world do have to look to third nations to get care staff. Do you think the government's white paper is going to create such a problem that people who have come over here to work in our care sector are going to pack up and leave?
I don't think the white paper will cause such a problem. We will have to see what happens. I mean, to me, the one sector that maybe should have been protected in this whole issue is the care sector, because of the risks that we don't simply have enough people and won't have enough people who are homegrown to do the job. But I think the RCN I'm a little suspicious of. I'm a little suspicious of what their survey mechanism was. I'm not seeing any third-party market research company doing any work on it. But my first reaction when I first read this a day or so ago was that I wanted to look at the staff survey for the NHS of attitudes, particularly of nurses, to their workplace. And I believe that the RCN has engendered a kind of mechanism, a kind of thinking there, that this is all about money. And the fact is that when people are unhappy with their working environment, I call it the motivational atmosphere. And if we look at the level at 60% overall, and that includes some that have much better results than that, 60% overall roughly are basically happy with working for the NHS. That's across the board. Now, when I was a chief executive of several companies over the last 20 to 30 years, I would have been devastated if I thought only 2 out of 3 of my staff were satisfied and wanted to work for us. So there is a problem there. And I think the problem is a cultural one and a leadership one, which has been rife in the NHS ever since I was first involved in 2009. And I think is probably in many public sector employers as well. So it didn't surprise me, this, because I think it was a way of expressing dissatisfaction. Whether they're all about to hop on a plane and go and work in Germany or wherever they want to do that, I think is another question.
So what is the problem here? Why are we not able to both train our own people in significant enough numbers and then retain them?
Well, let me talk about retention first of all. Um, I think to retain people in an atmosphere which is highly unionized, and where actually your union is talking a lot about going on strike, how poorly you're paid, how poorly you're rewarded, going very public with all of these statements all the time. I think, to work in that environment, which is so negative, must be quite debilitating for the way staff feel about the organisation. Going to the recruitment point, I'm absolutely sure that the original university requirement of becoming a nurse was over-egged. I think it was fine for there to be a university route to becoming a nurse, but I think more of an apprenticeship route would have retained many more nurses. And particularly, Alex, we have a lot of the more senior, what would be called nursing support workers, um, who are stuck in what is band 4, and they see the new nurses, newly qualified, straight out of university, coming in and earning more than they do. I think that it's tough to get out of that band. And I think those are the very people, some of them have been working in the NHS for quite a long time. We should be funding them, helping them to get the nursing qualification and get on the ladder, because they do a whole lot of stuff these days that traditionally have been done by fully qualified nurses. I think it's overly structured. I think it's it's a kind of, they mustn't do that. And because I'm more senior than they are, even though I've only been in the NHS for 5 minutes, that environment doesn't help at all in the way people feel about the organisation they work in. And a lot to do, in my experience, is the way you feel about the place you're working.
Do you know, I think that is such an important point to make. If you're surrounded by people who always talk things down, who doom monger and tell you where your work is miserable and horrible and it should be better and you're not being paid enough and under-resourced and hours too, you're going to start thinking those things, aren't you? Blimmin' unions. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. That was a great insight. And I hadn't really looked at it from that particular angle before. We're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere because I'm with you through until 7 o'clock today. When I come back, we're going to be joined by the wonderful Candice Holdsworth to carry on chewing through all of today's top stories. I'll see you on the other side.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Alex Phillips here instead of the one and only Mr. Jezza Kyle, who I believe is swinging his arm on some golf course somewhere. Good luck, Jezza. Probably most happy at the 19th hole. OK, right, we're now joined by Candice Holdsworth, political commentator, to carry on going through all of the big news stories of today. Candice, welcome to the show, my darling.
Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
I love that. Let's start off really happy. Woohoo! And now let's talk about the fact that we heard shocking news, that by November, so June, July, August, September, October, 6 months, there's not going to be any space in prison at all. That all the male cells are going to be filled. This is an absolute screaming disaster.
I know. It is one of the most mismanaged areas of policy, and you can see someone like Robert Jenrick. He's noticed that, and he's really picked up on it, and he's hammered Shabana Mahmood over it. But I just think that Labour, I think they're deeply mired in a lot of this thinking that, you know, prison isn't really how you stop crime, and it's actually bad for people, and you should focus a lot more on rehabilitation and management in the community. And I think this sort of thinking has informed the left for decades and decades and decades, with very mixed results. And I mean, anything that they've tried it in America as well, and it's never produced the results that people promise it will. I mean, I think that the biggest solution, we all know it, is to build more prisons and for punishment to be a big part of crime.
Absolutely. But, you know, it's interesting. We do have the highest prison population in Western Europe. There are some people who say there are various characters who probably shouldn't be in prison. You know, I mean, I think of Lucy Connolly, who definitely should not be in prison. She's of no risk to anybody in society. That poor, poor woman. I'm still disgusted by the treatment of her. Do you think we are sort of potentially putting people in prison who don't need to be there at the cost of then letting people out early who really ought to still be locked up?
Oh, yes. I mean, this focus on social media posts, you know, sitting in prison for 3 years for something you wrote on Twitter. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. I mean, I live in Borehamwood, where there was that story of the parents who had been, the police had knocked on their door for making comments about their children's school. Meanwhile, there's stabbings going on in the local community. I mean, there's a road where I live where everyone's scared to go at night because people are being stabbed. And yet the police are wasting precious time and resources just knocking on someone's door because, you know, they got a little bit, you know, inquisitive about their parents' school. And so I think that maybe, possibly, I mean, with the police, we know that there's a problem with the way that they manage their priorities. And they do focus a lot on social media and, you know, digital communications and that sort of thing. So maybe we just need to revert to common sense stuff.
I mean, we just had an announcement from the government just over an hour ago that they're going to build 3 new prisons. Great. Lord knows how long that's going to take. But is that going to be enough? Because it seems to me the culture inside prisons is really bad as well. A horrific story that yet another prison officer has been attacked, this time with a blade to the neck. Thankfully, the wounds were largely superficial and he needed to have sort of stitches and wound glue. But what a terrifying incident. We also learned that someone was attacked at Gartree Prison, a television thrown at them. A female officer sustained a broken arm. Just the other week, you had the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber chucking hot oil on people. It seems to me prisons are just absolutely lawless, that there's hullabaloo going on inside.
Yeah, so when you listen to people who comment on prison culture, for instance, you know, how the guards manage things in the prisons, they will say that it can be a real problem, that there is that sense of lawlessness and that you will find people who fail to set a proper culture. When it comes to these individuals, I mean, the ones who, for instance, are involved in terrorism, rampage killing, we do need to find a way to manage them because, you know, there are some people you can give them privileges in prison, they do reform, they improve their behavior, but a lot of the evidence shows that these individuals in particular don't. They actually enjoy violence. I mean, look at John T. Bravery, that person who hurled a child off the Tate Modern. I mean, he was attacking nursing staff in Broadmoor. So, I mean, I think that we've seen this new phenomenon of people who commit these very violent rampages, and there's probably got to be a different way of dealing with them than we typically have.
Yeah, and potentially we need more prison officers and have them better equipped and armed, I would say. There's been talk of potentially offering them tasers, which I'm surprised they don't have them already when you're having to deal with brutes like some of these people committing these horrific attacks. Talking about attacks, let's talk about the firebombs outside addresses connected to Sir Keir Starmer. No addresses that he lives in, but addresses that he once did live in, now rented out to other people. I mean, this is what I find quite fascinating, actually, is how downplayed this story has been. Yes, it's made headlines, but there hasn't been a huge sort of like moral panic about it. Starmer has said, and this isn't an attack against me, it's an attack against all of us. Very sort of sensible and admirable words, actually, from a Prime Minister. But it's deeply alarming.
It is, and we're seeing more of this kind of stuff. You know, I mean, various people who know a lot about counter-terror have said that they think that this is most likely a lone wolf, not some sort of foreign state operation, because it just wasn't really sophisticated enough. But we've seen lots of these. I mean, you know, obviously the attacks against Joe Cox, the attack against Sir David Amos. You look at the MP Mike Freer, for instance, who's, you know, now left politics because he was just getting so many death threats. I mean, this, you know, being an MP and actually standing for something is actually becoming quite dangerous. And, you know, throughout Britain's history, you know, we've tried to use the security services to manage this sort of thing. But I mean, how would you practically be able to provide support for every MP? You just couldn't do it, right? And it's a very unpleasant way to live your life. But I think in the times that we're living in, with so much complex geopolitics, and like I said, this new phenomenon of people who commit these killings, who commit violence, who seem to delight in rampages, this is something that we're really having to get to grips with and understand. But I always think that Keir Starmer just doesn't quite have the the ability to talk about things in those terms. Like whenever it's him who's the target of the attack, but he'll always have some sort of bland response, you know, just trying to manage things. He'll never confront it directly.
No, actually, I couldn't agree more. And yet people in his own party are slamming him for perhaps trying to confront directly our immigration problem. I think most people listening to this, if not every last human being listening to this, would agree that we've had a ridiculously overinflated level of inward migration to this country for way too long now. That successive governments have told us they're going to bring it down to tens of thousands. Successive governments have not just failed, but woefully failed. When you've got immigration grossing over 1 million people coming into the country every single year, Lord knows from where and to do what. This idea as well that's been debunked now by the ONS that, you know, migrants always contribute to GDP and make our economy better. Germany did their own report that said actually the level of migration to Germany is making us all the more poor, which I'd imagine is the same case here. But oh no, let's not talk about immigration. The minute Sir Keir Starmer actually does something blimmin' useful for once, all the wets and well, not even wets, the sort of woke bullies in his own party attacking his language, right? His language. And the bit that they're circling in on is the fact that he said island of strangers, which sort of, if you are some sort of student of Enoch Powell and happen to have memorised verbatim the Rivers of Blood speech, you might be able to find some sort of glancing similarity to something he said, but it's not even the same form of words. What even is this all about? What? People are going wild for this story. Oh, the divisive rhetoric, the harmful language. What? Island of strangers? Can you make that make sense to me? Because for as hard as I'm trying to squeeze out... Look, obviously I'm the sort of person who think words can't kill you and everyone's got to just grow up when it comes to hurty words. But even when I try to put myself in the shoes of people who do get offended by words, I still don't get what about we don't want to become an island of strangers is so blimmin' awful.
I think that's where the left of the Labour Party are, though. I mean, I don't think they've sort of moved with the times. I don't think they understand where the mood of the country is right now. I mean, look at Lucy Powell, her comments over grooming gangs. I mean, for her, it's just all about racism. I mean, she's never evolved on it. And I think that so many within the Labour Party are there. They haven't moved on. They're still having the debates that we were having in 2005.
I mean, look, you can expect they all go, oh, it's racist to say that, it's racist to say this. But even then, to me, it's a mad stretch to be offended by the term island of strangers. To me, what Sir Keir Starmer was essentially saying is we don't want to be a nation where people aren't mates with one another. We want the opposite. What is so divisive about that? I really, the goalposts for sensitivities are moved all the time. And at the end of the day, this isn't actually about the words. It never is about the actual words and people feeling, oh, I'm scared now. Since he said islands of strangers, I've been living here for 4 years and I'm originally from Yemen and now I'm terrified and I can't sleep at night and I don't want to get the bus because Keir Starmer said island of strangers. What nonsense. It's never actually about the words. This is all synthetic offence. It's about actually trying to stop this from happening. It's bullying, it's intimidation, it's censorship, and this is their age-old tactic to stand in the way of much-needed political change.
Of course, that's always what the left has done. I mean, they're just censorious. I mean, going back slightly to the grooming gangs, which is another analogy, they tried to do that. They just tried to shut it down. They think if you stop talking about it, if you control the language about it, then the problem goes away. But it doesn't. And I think that what they don't realise is that the public have just left them behind on this issue. The public have completely moved on, not just here, but all over the world now. And Labour, obviously, you know, Keir Starmer and the people around him are panicking because look what happened in the local council elections. I mean, places where, you know, Reform and the Conservatives have never been able to touch before. Labour are losing, and one of the biggest issues is immigration, so they know they need to move in that direction. The problem is, though, the people on the right don't trust Keir Starmer on it. They think he's a weather vane. And then there are those in his party who will never go there. They will never go there. They are totally ideological. They can never be pragmatic on this issue. So he's actually a very awkward position, a very, very awkward position.
No, I agree. And even when you do sort of slice and dice the white paper and how much of that will pass muster and actually turn itself into an act that's passed through Parliament, Lord knows. But even if the whole thing, nuts and bolts, is cleared, it's not really going to make much of a difference anyway. There was so much hot air in that white paper. I'm fed up with people as well paying lip service to, we need to be a country with better integration. You know, David Cameron said it. What did he do? Naff all. You know, even Tony Blair has said it in the past. What's he done? Naff all. Now the Labour Party's saying, you know, successive Conservative Prime Ministers and Ministers have said it. What have they done? Naff all. Because the problem is this, Candice, the sort of policies you're going to have to put in place to create this sort of magical integration actually means saying to people from other countries, you adopt our way of life or go.
Yeah. Oh, well, you need much stronger management and much stronger incentives, and they seem to have just woefully, Labour just doesn't seem to understand that. I mean, look what they did when they first came into power. They got rid of the Rwanda scheme. The Rwanda scheme, which was actually starting to work. People were going through Ireland. And if you listen to Marco Rubio in the US, I mean, they've just had massive success on the southern border. I mean, they've reduced crossings by like 90% or something. And he said in an interview, it's an incentives game. That's all it is. I mean, everyone who knows that knows that. I mean, they might even start using Rwanda. The US might even start using Rwanda, everything that was built there. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that they are evidence-led in what they do. They sort of went for slogans like smash the gangs. And yeah, all this talk, what is it going to lead to? The things that you really have to do, I think that they are too scared to do them. Like I said, the Labour left, they can't move there. They just can't go there. Ideologically, they're far too constrained.
But also, this is it. When you look at Sweden's had some fairly successful policies by saying, you know what, we're going to ban the burqa and we're going to get rid of benefits for anyone coming here illegally. Do you know what? I'm going to say something which, you know, I don't know why people don't say it enough, really. I kind of think if you come to a country to work and then you lose your job, unless it's exceptional circumstances that you've been here long enough, you're practically part of the furniture and your kids are at school here and all the rest of it, which is slightly different, I kind of think you leave the country and go home. I don't understand why we have a policy where migrants are given the same entitlement to welfare as native-born Brits. And when I say native-born Brits, I mean Brits of any creed or colour, you know, but people who are from families that are from this country and have contributed to this country. I'm someone who's worked abroad a lot. When I was over there working in Kenya, if for whatever reason my job ended, I wouldn't suddenly go to the Kenyan state and say, now can you pay for me to have a house because I don't have a job. I'd think, oh, well, that hasn't worked out. I better go back to Britain where I've got family and a support network and then potentially claim welfare in my own country. It seems crazy to me that people can come into the UK and even if they've, you know, have done a bit of work, that when things sort of, you know, don't quite work out, we're like, don't worry, here's a house, here's some cash.
Yeah, I think that undermines people's faith in the system. I mean, I don't know if you saw the article in the Times over the weekend. I mean, it emerged that the wife of the leader of Sierra Leone has a council house in London. I mean, a few people commented and they said, are these stories designed to give me some sort of stroke? I mean, it's just such an abuse of the system. It really is. And this has just been going on and on and on and on and on. And it's so lax. And I think that a lot of it is because, these parts of the system, welfare, immigration, are often managed by people with ideas, far, far, far to the left of most ordinary people, most common sense opinions anyway. And, they have no scrutiny. People aren't looking at them. They don't know what they're doing, and they deserve a lot more of it. And I think that's why you see in Denmark, you mentioned Sweden as well, they've started taking, sort of more robust approach to integration, something that's just been so neglected over the years. I think that especially New Labour, they tried to just keep the conversation to economics, right? They never spoke culture or any of these other things. But I think that everyone can see now that those arguments are completely moribund.
Oh, absolutely. And the worst thing about this government white paper is it seems to be going after the wrong people. It always does. And I'll give you a prime example. They talk about, we're going to move the goalposts for when you get indefinite leave to remain to 10 years. Now, I think that if you put that policy in place, that's fair enough. If you say, from now on, people coming into the country, if you want to become a British citizen, you have to have contributed for 10 years. But for example, my Turkish next door neighbours, who are whisker away, I love them. She's a biochemist. He's an oncologist. Their kid's a gorgeous young guy. He wants to go to medical school himself, currently doing his GCSEs. Good luck to him. He's a fantastic young man. I adore them. We're in and out of each other's houses. We're not from an island of strangers. We know everything about each other's lives. I even phoned my mum a couple of days ago, knowing it was her birthday, and FaceTimed her. Nicest people on earth. When this white paper came out, they were terrified because they were like, we're going to have to pack our bags and go. We thought we were close to being able to properly settle here, and we love Britain and this is where we want to be. And now we're going to have to pack and go back to Turkey with that mad Erdogan, who we hate, and the Islamism, which we're not part of remotely. And then you suddenly think this is the impact sometimes when, when the left do have the bleeding hearts over, people are scared and worried. In certain circumstances, they are. And yet there was no clarification on that. I actually found myself digging on their behalf and sort of sent to them, I don't think this is going to be applied in retrospect. But why is it we're just not discerning when it comes to immigration, that we can wrap our arms around those people who are worthy? No, we don't do that. We terrify them. And the people who are oiks, who frankly shouldn't be here, we're like, would you like a house for free? How do we get it so wrong all the time?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I know so many people like that who struggle to get their indefinite leave to remain, or, they paid thousands and thousands of pounds to immigration lawyers because they knew if they made just one mistake on the forms, that's it, it would be denied. And, these were people, like you say, exactly like your neighbours, totally productive, want to integrate, want to come here. And there are so many people like that. And I think what the system does, though, sadly, is it doesn't cater towards them. It doesn't cater towards them at all. The values inherent within the system are sort of, representation, I think, because of the way immigration lawyers are incentivized. It's to defend people who, maybe are having a bit of trouble, whereas those who are abiding by the law, they're sort of left on their own to fend for themselves. And that is wrong, and we shouldn't have that. I mean, Britain is such an attractive place to so many people around the world, and a system which really worked hard to encourage those people. That could benefit Britain enormously. It really could.
Yeah, no, I agree fully. Now, do you want to know another bit of who would have thunk it news of the day? Apparently net zero will not bring electricity prices down. That's according to the boss of British Gas. I mean, of course it won't. If anything, it's just going to continue to keep driving prices up because we're not self-sufficient when it comes to fossil fuels. We're having to depend upon importing them from the international market, where we are at the mercy of whichever sort of mad OPEC member nation might decide to cut barrel production in order to send the price sky high. And what's more, we couple electricity to the wholesale gas price.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got the highest energy bills in the world. And I've not heard a single person in government explain how they're going to do something about that. Instead, all they keep doing is putting more and more into the net zero basket. We got to get all more windfarms and solar panels, and farmers' fields must be given up for the project of saving the planet. And, everyone needs some sort of heat pump and gas boilers and electric cars. OK, great. But can we just bring down energy prices first? Please, I beg of you.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that, Ed Miliband promising that energy prices were going to come down, it was he was trying to be pragmatic, to promise people something practical. But as everyone who observes this industry closely has said, but by what mechanism? By what mechanism are you going to bring prices down? Like you said, the way that the wholesale pricing works is actually the government subsidizes renewable energies, that gets added onto our bills. And I think that's such a problem throughout the world. Anywhere that's gone for having everything renewable, the prices have never gone down. In fact, since Ed Miliband has come to power, energy bills have only gone up. So that was just such an empty promise. That was never going to happen. They keep shutting down any attempt to have fracking in this country. They keep saying that won't work either, even though when we look at the US, their huge supply, like homegrown supply that they have of oil and gas, has made them energy independent, and their prices have come down. So that's not true either. I mean, they attack things like fracking, I think, on completely hollow, empty grounds. And it's, we are so vulnerable in this country. We know that. We are so vulnerable to the international energy markets, international energy supply, and it's just immiserating businesses and households in this country. I think very few people realize just how much, a modern economy depends on abundant and affordable energy. Mm-hmm.
But this is the other thing, it's all interlinked, right? We've been talking about nursing earlier. I was having a conversation about the hospitality sector and saying I don't understand why the hospitality sector says we're so desperate for foreign workers. British people don't want to do it, because we don't pay them enough. And I'm like, do you know what would help the hospitality industry and indeed hospitals pay staff more money if they didn't have to spend so blimmin' much on turning the lights on? That would go a long way when it comes to reducing overhead, so you can give people better pay settlements. This net zero nonsense goes to the heart of everything. If you turn yourself into a manufacturing economic basket case that therefore can't give people the right wages for cost of living, it has a knock-on effect of meaning fewer and fewer people actually want to go to the workplace. They can't see the point when they'll get just as much money just being on benefits and festering. And then so what you've got to do instead, let's bring in a cheaper workforce. Then immigration goes sky high. Quite frankly, if we could get on top of not paying so much for our blimmin' gas and electricity, it would actually have a ripple effect and solve a load of crises along the way.
Yeah, it's total systems failure. It's a failure to think in that way, how one thing leads to another. I mean, that is such an issue. We talk about how, the care sector, how the health sector is just completely reliant on people from coming overseas, but the deeper questions aren't asked. Why are we struggling so much with a homegrown supply? Is it pay issues? Is it that we, overly credentialize the nursing qualification, so fewer people want to go into nursing now? That's such a big issue. But of course, yeah, absolutely. Any modern industry is dependent on energy. It is energy intensive, and that will play into so many things. I mean, the whole industrial revolution was made possible because of fossil fuels. Yeah. That's why. It would never have happened otherwise.
Right. I mean, every single thing on earth, whether it's the cost of living in your own house, can you put on the heating or not? Whether it's the cost of a house, because guess what? If you're operating on building sites and things like that, you're going to have to use a bit of energy from time to time. And like I said, it just has a ripple effect all over. If you can suddenly make it cheaper to exist and do business in this country, the knock-on effects would be enormous. Candice, thank you ever so much, my darling. Always great having that particular special little migrants from South Africa join us on this programme. Talking about migrants, we're going to be talking about illegal migration profit and asylum hotel companies who have vowed to hand back some of the profits that, frankly, should come straight back to the taxpayer for housing people who've broken into the country illegally. We're going to be speaking to Stephen Wolf, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, after this.
we know that over the past 3 years he's been on countless foreign jet-setting luxury trips around the world at our expense. He says it's to, foster relations with foreign countries and to tell them how wrong Russia was to invade Ukraine. I'm not sure what that has got to do with the Speaker, but there you are. He spent about £300,000 over the last 3 years going on these luxury trips.
I put it in writing, and they basically replied and said, we can't remove him out of your theatre, but what we can do is we can cancel your surgery, we can move you to a different doctor with a different consultant at an unknown date. And I couldn't believe it. I said, well, you're prolonging my pain now because it needs to be done. It's like an emergency. With endometriosis, it's all over my bowels. It was a big operation. It was a joint case with the colorectal team. A lot of organisation went in. They just bypassed all that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. Let's welcome onto HMS Sensible, Stephen Wolfe, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. How are you doing, my darling?
Great, loving the weather, enjoying it, as no doubt the people smugglers are with the boats across the channel.
Hey, look at your nice glasses. I haven't seen you in bins before. That's a sophisticated look.
Well, this is the bit about age every now and again.
I'll tell you what you should do. Tell you what you should do, though. A bit like people have purposeful books on their bookcase, during the COVID era when people were doing Zooms for the first time on television. There was a sort of race to see who could have the most significant and impressive titles on their shelves. You need to do something creative with your fridge magnets.
Oh, I do. I just got the other one behind me saying it's always time for gin.
Well, there you go. I was going to say it's sun's over the yardarm somewhere in the world. Right, now, let's talk about this story, which is two companies that receive taxpayers' money to house asylum seekers in hotels have said they're going to hand back some of their profits to the Home Office. Well, that's nice, isn't it? Under contracts signed by the previous Conservative government, Clear Springs, Mears and Serco must pay back any profits of more than 5%. Now, the thing is, before people start going, isn't this lovely? That's exactly how the system works. These are pretty big vendors with sort of trusted trader relationships with the government who are about to get even more profits for sticking migrants into private accommodation, right?
Yeah, I mean, come on, let's look at this in terms of the grand scheme of things. The fact that we've got Serco, which is roughly around 7% of its turnover, is migrant hotels, and Clear Springs, as we saw, the owner of Clear Springs entered as a billionaire into the Times top 300 of wealthiest people in the United Kingdom. We are not talking people here who are poor, impoverished, or companies not short of a bob or two. So anyone who thinks this is a great thing, yes, it is. Any money coming back to the taxpayers, but they're doing it because they know that there's a lot of pressure on them at the moment, and the contract said they couldn't have as much as they claimed.
And you'd think, well, that's all well and good, but then you've got another story here about the migrant hotel kings raking in millions from asylum seekers, bosses of three firms which have made more than the £380 million profit. I mean, it's just... It staggers me, quite frankly, that I'm beginning to think that this whole thing could be operated as a bit of a successful, profitable racket if you wanted it to.
Look, I've deemed these three companies the leech leviathans of the asylum industry. These are the people making the biggest profits out of all of the misery that we have seen, whether it's those being transported by people smugglers, by people who are having to see their towns destroyed by large numbers of asylum seekers in hotels. But also now, more importantly and more worrying to me, is the fact that they have been sending out terms of business to landlords across the country saying, we want to take your houses for 5 years. 5 years at a time. We'll pay everything. We'll pay your rent, council tax, all the repairs. And what will that do? It will remove housing stock for working people who are struggling to find accommodation as it is. And anything that's left will see sky-high rents for them That I find abysmal and completely immoral.
One thing that worries me about this move, other than the fact that it's a complete injustice, giving migrants who've got no right to be in this country, have broken in illegally, most of them don't share our values, a significant subset don't have good intentions, and giving them just a house for having the audacity to break the law, I think is revolting. But I worry about the security implications of this as well, because love them or loathe them, and I think most people absolutely despise migrant hotels, they were like Fort Knox. In terms of, the migrants might be able to come and go and work at, takeaway companies and on the black market. And I think a lot of them did, and had guests come and stay overnight, all sorts of, ridiculous proverbial pee-taking going on. But at least there was, you knew who was in that hotel, and there were security guards on the door. So if one of them went AWOL, if you needed to track one of them down, you'd have some idea where to find them. My worry about starting to spread these people out within communities is if you do have a black market worker, a drugs kingpin, someone who's been shipped in by a terrorist organisation or a hostile state, there's absolutely zero surveillance or control over them once you've stuck them in somebody's house.
You're highlighting a seriously important point, is that once we allow these people into the communities in ways that are not checked and monitored, first of all, as you would do if they're in tented communities or enclosed bases, secondly, in hotels, which is less secure and, less monitored, we know that they're allowed to go out all day and not necessarily actually put in trouble if they come back. But once they're in the community, once they're out there in either housing stock that Serco, Mears or Clear Homes have actually connected into, or the general aspect of councils putting them into accommodation, we have no idea where they are. Now, you and I both know that the vast majority of these people will not be the terrorists, will not be deeply involved in something against the state. But it doesn't only takes one or two or three, as we learned from the Manchester bomb, or anyone else that we've seen as the lone terrorist to actually commit a crime. And I think, rather than pulling up tweets and chasing people who are 71 for something they said on a tweet, the police should be more concerned about what's going on into these hotels and who's there. But will they do so? I doubt it very much.
Right, and will people who live on these streets, who have maybe bought their house or are paying private rent or whatever, have any say over who their neighbours are going to be? I mean, yes, in the private sector you don't. If someone buys a house next door to you and they're a ne'er-do-well, there's little you can do about it. But I'd be particularly aggrieved if I was a mother of young kids and all of a sudden 5 guys from the Middle East sort of rocked up in their 20s and were sort of all living in the house next door. I would feel pretty unsettled.
Well, I think they may feel pretty unsettled, but ever since the so-called rivers of blood speech, we introduced the Race Relations Act in the early 1970s. And ever since then, you've got no right to complain about who comes into your own home if you're a hotelier or a landlord. You can't complain about them whether you think that they're dangerous or not. And subsequent additions to the law, including the ones that the Conservative Party started to implement and certainly are going to be implemented by this government, is that it says that they'll have no control from councils to be able to try and oppose people coming into hotels or this accommodation, which is why, quite rightly, that Reform is going to use its 10 councils to try and look at judicial reviews so that they at least give their citizens of their communities the option to be able to challenge these individuals coming into them through legislation that's already there and challenge the government with the legislation they're trying to impose on councils.
Yeah, I think it's a very smart move, and just you wait, if all councils had that option, let's see how many Lib Dem controlled councils suddenly had respondents saying we don't want them here either. Stephen Wolfe, thank you ever so much, my darling. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when I come back after the break, it's an opportunity for you to join the conversation. I would love it so much if you come and prostrated yourself on my couch of common sense, shared in some communal catharsis. 03444 99 1000 is the number to dial if you'd like to come and have some shared therapy. Get it off your chest. You'll feel better afterwards. You can use that number as well to send me a WhatsApp message or indeed to leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. You know I like them. 87222 is the number to text. If you're going to do that, you've got to write the word talk before you text. That way it rattles around in outer space, but somehow using that particular set of digits and those particular letters finds its way into our computer system here within the HQ. Right, going to take a short break now, but I'll see you on the other side.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Let's do some of your messages now. Very simple one, this from Paul. We don't believe the man Starmer. He lies, he's not to be trusted. Well, yeah, there you go. Alex Keir will do nothing on immigration. His promises are for after the next election. So like all his previous pre-election promises, it's just words to get elected and ignored afterwards. Alex, if someone had tweeted Keir's immigration speech during the Southport riots, would they be serving 31 months in prison? Well, probably. Maybe Starmer had ChatGPT rewrite Enoch Bell's speech. I still don't understand what is wrong with saying island of strangers. I don't get it. And you know what, actually, what I'd like to know, by the way, I'm with you until 7. I want to know what it's like where you live. Do you live in one of those cities or towns that's completely balkanised, where your neighbours don't speak the language, where once upon a time your butchers, bakers and candlestick makers have all been replaced by shops selling goods from around the world that have got very little to do with your childhood? Or where you work, perhaps. You know, maybe you're a builder and once upon a time the building site was full of, you know, Englishmen and the odd Irishman, and now it's, what's the joke actually? An Irishman, an Englishman and a Scotsman will, you know, go into a pub or go to a building site, whatever it is. Let me know. I'd love to hear your experiences, because I'll tell you something, right? I'll get the ball rolling, shall I? Where I live in London, even just 4 years ago, yes, it's in a nice borough, but it's the sort of bogey end of it. And it was still a really good place to live. You would walk down the street quite happily, you know, go to the pub, go to the bar, walk home, no problem. Lots of little independent shops dotted along the main thoroughfare. And literally within the last 2 years, and especially the last year, all those little shops have closed down. They've all become souvenir stores. And I'm like, all right, what's that a front for? And just the nature of the changes of the demographics are clear, right? Clear. All of a sudden there's nonsense happening that never used to happen before, and I say nonsense, that's putting it mildly. So the co-op had to board up one of its entrances because there were so many people going in and looting it. Well, they've now actually reopened the entrance, so you don't have to go in through the exit and back out through the exit. They've reopened it because now they've got all of their meat under lock and key. They've literally got everything in these sort of like special security protected plastic cases because people can't be trusted putting things through the tills anymore. Same with the boots. They've had to board up one of their doors because people are going in and just going on the rob. And what's more, I was woken up at 12:30 the other night and I didn't know what on earth was going on. I heard engines revving, car horns, an absolute cacophony, and then bang, 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 really loud, right on my street. And I was terrified. It sounded like gunshots. And I thought I actually wouldn't put that past this place now. You know, I've spoken before quite publicly about the sort of street harassment I'm getting, which I never used to get. All the, you know, creepy men with their leering eyes looking at you like that as you walk past, following you down the street. Hey, beautiful, all of that. And I thought I wouldn't put it past my neighbourhood, frankly, to have someone shooting somebody at close range. And my other half is like, I'm going to go and see what it is. Like, don't you open that front door. Anyway, looked out, poked his head out the blinds, and he could see fireworks. And literally, this sort of quite dodgy kebab shop on the main thoroughfare, it's changed its name recently, put a new sign up. No one's ever seen this place sell a kebab, but all sorts of strange activity goes on in the wee small hours. They were letting rockets out, horizontally out of the window of the kebab shop into cars and down the street. I mean, what on God's earth is going on? I was terrified. That could have caused a massive accident. I want to know if anyone was even arrested. Why is that place doing business still? This is what I'm talking about, the degradation of society. It's blimmin' awful to have your rent put up by £1,000 a month in the last 4 years is what it's gone up by, which is insane. And what have I got in return for that? That's right, street harassment, looting in all the local shops they've had to board themselves up, and some nutter setting off fireworks at 12:30 at night in a residential area into passing cars. That's what I've got in return, and it's disgusting. London has become a hellhole, and do you know what? There might be people on the left to go, I've not seen it. Like you saw Susanna Reid, nice woman by the way, always nice as pie to me when I go on GMB, but you saw her going, I live in London, we're not an island of strangers, everyone's really nice, it's so wonderful, they all get along. And I'm like, which part of London do you live in, eh? Want to come down my street? Huh? You want to come where the normal people live who can't afford the leafy paradise of the burbs and see what's happening? Because I'm telling you what, it ain't pretty, it's damn scary. And if you're somebody with a teenage, it's absolutely terrifying. You're worried if you've got a kid under the age of 20, they're probably going to be stabbed on their way home from school. It's not funny, and it's not racist to talk about this. It's not xenophobic or divisive to point out that most of London these days is like some sort of, you know, horrible banana republic that's just going gradually wrong, that it's just rife with crime and people who don't seem to care about the neighbourhoods that they're living in. This is true. It is a statement of fact. And there are plenty of people. I was speaking to a wonderful guy from Uganda the other day in a taxi. He's been in this country forever. And but they say it as well. You know, it's not some sort of racist thing when they say that a lot of people who've come into the country lately just don't seem to care. Because it's true. But that's not saying everyone's coming to the country lately. I shouldn't have to keep clarifying this and do the whole disclaimer. By the way, I'm not referring to every single... But there is a subset of people who are just, you know who they are. They're going out on those marches on a Saturday, aren't they? Oh, my goodness. It drives me mad. It really, really does. Right, someone said, great show, Alex. What is charcuterie? Are you joking? You've actually almost spelt charcuterie right there, so I think you know what it is. I've just been scoffing in a little box here, some bits I got from Borough Market. This is a startling message. My friend was a prison officer for 3 weeks. He left because he had his life threatened every day and didn't feel safe. I mean, you can't have that. You've got to make sure that when prison officers go to work that they're safe. It is a frontline, terrifying job. You can't have them undefended and unarmed. Absolutely with you, Alex. Starmer didn't go far enough. This is the white paper, of course. The way things are going, the indigenous population will become an ethnic minority. We should and must be one British culture with all the values and standards that entails. Now, it's interesting, that one, because I'm actually going to be speaking to a demographer about this and the projections, actually, for when it comes to the point that the British population become a minority was, in theory, once upon a time in 2050, which will be in my lifetime. But now that's actually sort of being reversed downwards of every passing day. And you kind of think, is it so wrong to want your country to exist in the future? Right, let's speak to Philippa, who is in beautiful Poole in Dorset. Hi there, Philippa.
Hi, Alex. Lovely to talk to you. And it is very beautiful here today. It is gorgeously sunny.
Oh, nice. I'm green with envy, believe me. What do you want to talk about, Philippa?
Basically, Poole is a lovely area. But I've found, gosh, over the last sort of like 5-10 years of living here, the high street's very run down. It's got quite deprived. We've got a lot of charity shops, a lot of barber shops. And places like that, and closed shops right in the main sort of shopping thoroughfare. But we've also got a sort of haves and have-nots. We've got all the footballers and their managers who live down at Sandbanks and all of that, which is lovely. It's 5 minutes away from me. And then you've got the more deprived areas with the social housing and people on low pay and all that kind of thing. So there's a wide demographic in this area. I live in a flat which is right on the main road from Poole, and there's a cut-through road from like the train station to going to the local hospital. And basically in the early hours of the morning and in the evenings you get a lot of the workers from the hospital cutting through this particular route. And I've found over the last couple of years of living here that there's a wide variety of people who are going down sort of this area, different races, different people speaking different languages, not even speaking English. I see a lot more black people. I see a lot of people in burqas and things now, which 5 years ago you just would not have seen. And I thought that, we'd sort of missed all of what was going on in like the bigger cities like Birmingham and London and everything, but I think gradually the whole of the country is beginning to get like that now, and it is really scary. And I remember in the 80s I was up at Leicester University, my first time away from home, when I was 18 doing a fashion design degree, and I walked down one street and I swear to God in like 1988 I was the only white person walking down this road, and it absolutely scared me to death.
Yeah, do you know what? I mean, if this was any other programme, right, not on this channel, but any other network or broadcaster by now, I'd be saying that's a disgraceful thing to say. You're saying you're scared of people just because of the colour of their skin. But the point is this, right, Philippa? It's not racist or xenophobic to say something. It's kind of built into human biology that you can't help it. You know, you can't help if you're not familiar with people, their culture, their language. Of course it concerns and worries people. It's a perfectly normal way to feel. And yet what you've just said in most other sort of, most other radio stations would be challenged as being something totally unacceptable. But thank you for sharing it, because I personally think that, as a woman, there is something that, especially I think as a woman, that you do feel incredibly vulnerable if you feel like you're not surrounded by a community that you know. That's not to say that all perpetrators of horrible crimes are non-white. It's nothing to do with that. It's nothing to do with that. It is an inbuilt, very human reaction. Philippa, thank you ever so much. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be discussing the assisted dying bill, because, well, it's passed the first hurdle in Scotland, but its passage in England, therefore the UK as such, might be destabilised by the fact that the Royal College of Psychiatrists, they're neutral, but they've been advising the government on how this bill should be equipped on the basis of, well, do you know what? You better check someone's mental health before you agree to euthanising them. They're pulling their support for the assisted dying bill, saying that the government essentially hasn't listened. We're going to be discussing that after this.
I've campaigned to have data in the public domain about the link between immigration and crime. That is now starting to happen. The Home Secretary has finally agreed to it. But I suspect that will show that there is a serious link between particularly sexual crime and the numbers of people coming in on small boats, because some of these people are coming from countries where the attitudes are frankly alien to those that we have in our own country, particularly towards women, and that is driving crime. And our immigration system should put the interests of the British public first and foremost.
Across the UK, on DAB+, On your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back. And the assisted dying bill, a massive piece of legislation put forward, of course, by Kim Leadbeater, seems to have hit a bit of a snarl in England, at least, where the Royal College of Psychiatrists have now withdrawn their support. It's very important, this, because essentially, once upon a time, the bill said that a High Court judge would have to sign everything off. Now, instead, they're going to come up with a committee, including a social worker, someone from the judiciary, either extant or retired, and a psychiatrist, making sure that actually it's perfectly safe to apply the legislation. Well, they've now said the government didn't listen to our concerns. We're not backing this bill. Let's speak now to former Conservative MP Tom Hunt. I mean, this is pretty significant, isn't it? And we know that this bill has, so it's so important that it's got to have the right checks and balances. Seemingly, it doesn't.
Yeah, it is critical, and I think the important thing here is that when it comes to, we think the third reading vote, which is going to be the decisive vote in the House of Commons, is probably going to be next month. There is a report stage later on Friday, but we don't expect there's going to be a third reading vote on Friday. But the key thing is when it comes to that vote, MPs will be voting on the specifics of the bill as it stands, which will become law. They're not voting on a vague principle of assisted dying. They're voting on this bill, and in my view, it's an unsafe bill, and it's a bill that would put the most vulnerable at risk. And I think, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, I don't think they could have been any clearer in their views on this bill. It is an unsafe bill, and it puts the most vulnerable at risk. And I really, really hope that the next opportunity, which will probably be next month for third reading, MPs reject it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that concerns me, look, my personal position on this is I don't support assisted dying, but I am extremely sympathetic to those who do, because I've had my own family experience with someone who had a really horrific chronic disease and contemplated it themselves. But my worry is this: even if anything does get through Parliament, and right now it does have appropriate checks and balances, in time, there's always slippage. There's always people who challenge something in court and says, well, it should have applied to me. And then that becomes a case precedent. Oh, well, let's move this particular parameter. Let's consider this cohort of people. In every single country where they've applied an assisted dying bill, over time, what's happened is they've started to include women in their 20s who want to kill themselves for mental health reasons. Horrible things like that. I mean, do you think there's any world in which we can actually get this bill through Parliament with the right checks and balances, that someone like me, even though I don't sort of personally morally support it, would feel at least satisfied that for those who want to avail themselves to such a procedure, there will be correct protections?
Well, it hasn't happened anywhere else. I think if we look at all the other countries that have sought to introduce similar laws, Canada, the Netherlands, various US states, I'd say even the Australian states that have introduced it, there have been horror stories associated with most of the places that have introduced these laws. And the Royal College of Psychiatrists, this is really quite serious, because let's not forget, Kim Leadbeater said that she had this High Court safeguard at second reading. A large number of MPs voted for her bill on the premise that it had that High Court safeguard. It's been stripped out. It's been replaced by these panels. One of the three people on these panels will be a psychiatrist. And you've now had the Royal College of Psychiatrists saying that this isn't a good setup, this bill's unsafe. And of course, they've also said that they don't think there's enough psychiatrists nationally to actually staff these panels, because, the impact assessment from the government, not only a few weeks ago, said that after its 10 years after its implementation, over 4,000 people a year could be accessing this service. We've seen in Canada, which introduced euthanasia laws, that now almost 5% of all deaths a year are through that pathway. There's no point. This isn't a debate in the Cambridge Union about the principle of assisted suicide.
Right.
I call it assisted suicide, not assisted dying, because that's what it is.
This is real life and, frankly, real death. I couldn't agree more. Tom, it's wonderful seeing you again. I hope you're keeping well. We're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere, because the Talk favourite, Peter Blexley, is off.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, hello, you lovely, gorgeous, patriotic, discerning things. It's wonderful to have your company. Just know that you are appreciated and adored. I'm pleased to say someone else who's appreciated and adored is going to be joining us now. Mr. Peter Blexley, former Met detective, as if he needs any introduction. Who can compete with his dulcet tones? That's what I want to know. Peter, great to have you on the programme. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you for having me.
Oh, I always love you. It's just... You should be a storyteller. I think you should be like, your voice should be like sat-navs and bedtime books and all sorts of things.
Well, all my books are available as audio books with me narrating them, so thank you for the plug.
Is that right? Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. Right, now, talk to us about what on earth is going on in prisons. So, first of all, we've just learned that, and actually the government has sort of done a big press conference, we're going to build 3 new prisons just as well, because apparently we've run out of prison spaces for men come November, which is a terrifying prospect. Then we learn for yet another 2 attacks against prison officers. The first one, HMP Woodhill, a prison officer, someone jumped on him and tried to slash his throat with an improvised weapon, had to go to hospital, required stitches and surgical glue. And then at Gartree prison, another prison officer was attacked by someone who faked an epileptic fit, lobbed a telly box at his nut, and then a female prison officer sustained a broken arm. I mean, what on earth is going wrong in prisons?
It's an appalling state of affairs, and it is, to a certain degree, a tale of a lack of investment, proper training, recruitment, a butchering of prison officers' wages and the such like. But it is also very much a story of the lanyard classes running the show and doing it very, very badly. The assaults we've heard of today are just a smattering. In the year to September 2024, there were 10,500 assaults on prison staff. It's not going to be very long before, tragically, I fear I will be on this channel talking about a prison officer who has lost their life at work. It's that serious. Something needs to be done drastically and urgently.
10,500 attacks on prison officers in 1 year?
Yes, up from about 8,600 the previous year. So you can see the steep rise in these attacks. Now, it's complex, like so many of these matters are. And of course, it'll be no surprise for viewers and listeners to hear that the prison service are struggling to recruit people because the pay isn't pro rata what it used to be. If you start as an 18-year-old, ludicrously, you will have to work on the landings until you are 65 to receive your pension. That simply has to change. And the training isn't long enough or good enough or robust enough, nor is the vetting. So many of the problems that the police service have had in recent times with inappropriate people joining is being echoed in the prison service. And we've had a considerable number of female members of staff having, yes, carnal relationships with prisoners and constantly getting sacked and going to jail for that.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. That is definitely something that's seen a huge uptick as a trend, which begs many questions. But how are prison officers equipped, Peter? Because you'd think if they're dealing with some of the most hard nuts crooks and gangsters that this country knows, that they should surely have, arms, for want of a better word, to help protect themselves.
They most definitely should. There are specialist units that come in when there's a riot, of course, but that's often way too late for the frontline prison staff who are, generally speaking, are patrolling the landings in a shirt and a pair of trousers and very little else. There is, of course, a large plea now by the Prison Officers Association, which I support wholeheartedly, for stab vests to be issued to prison officers and a rollout of taser. I think they are increasingly facing more and more dangerous people with a higher level of assaults, so they need to be protected. And to all the good prison officers out there, and there are many of them, I say I support you fundamentally without compromise, because you know what? prison officers and police officers deal with the worst of humanity. There's just a wall that separates their roles.
I find it absolutely astonishing prison officers don't have stab vests and tasers. In any other walk of life, it would come down to health and safety. You wouldn't have someone sort of, you know, cleaning the windows of Talk Towers without a safety harness, just sort of climbing up with Spider-Man suckers on his hand, because people are like, well, he might fall off and die. You know, in all other walks of life, you can't even do a press conference near some sort of industrial equipment without having to wear a hard hat and a high-vis vest. And yet people who are facing some of the most dangerous people in a contained, kettled environment, just wearing shirts and trousers, it beggars belief. What do you think about the fact that, well, we know that prisons are going to be filled up, male prisons, by November. The Labour Party's going to build 3 new prisons. Brilliant. They need to do that, and sharpish, don't they? But in the meantime, oh, well, let's just release people early. Now criminals are to be released after a third of a prison sentence. It doesn't even make sense anymore. You're going to do 30 years in prison. Actually, it will be just 10.
Well, I watched Shabana Mahmood's press conference this afternoon, where she also announced that prisoners who will be released and then breach the terms of their parole, say, for example, they don't turn up to meetings with probation staff, or they do something else which is a breach, will continue to be recalled to prison, but only for 28 days. Now, there's a sentencing review, which is probably going to be published next week. And I can guarantee you that what is going to happen is that less people are going to be sent to jail. Those who do go to jail will probably be for shorter times, although I suspect many very short sentences will be abolished. And what does that equate to? It equates to the streets of Britain becoming increasingly lawless, as if they're not lawless enough already.
Well, I couldn't agree more. But then, you know, often the debate goes down the line of some people shouldn't be in prison. I think perhaps that, well, Lucy Connolly obviously should not be in prison. I want to keep saying her name every single day because I don't think the public should forget about her. I'm amazed, actually, more people aren't, you know, protesting about the fact that poor woman's been banged up for 3 years. It's utterly, utterly reprehensible. But an astonishing news story today. The beast of Birkenhead, Peter Sullivan, is in line now for £1 million compensation payout after spending 38 years in clink for a murder that DNA evidence today suggests he did not commit. Tell us more about that, Peter.
Yes, way back in 1986, when Diane Sinnott was walking home from her part-time job in a pub, she was also a florist. She had her florist van. She was a young 21-year-old with all her life in front of her, and she was planning to get married, which is why she was doing extra hours in the pub. What a perfect example of a hard-working, glorious young woman she was. Unfortunately, her van ran out of petrol one night after she'd worked at the pub. She was walking home and she was brutally attacked, raped, and subjected to the most horrific assault, which took her life. Peter Sullivan stood trial the following year. Peter Sullivan was an unemployed labourer with considerable learning difficulties. He was interviewed, not in the presence of a solicitor, and a false confession was made, basically under duress. He pleaded his innocence forever, for 38 long years, before finally DNA, a sample from the deceased's body, was examined, and the DNA of another person, who is the person responsible for the attack, was discovered. Consequently, yesterday, Peter had his appeal upheld. He was released immediately into the bosom and the love of his family, where he should actually have been spending the last 38 years.
I cannot imagine the mental toll of knowing that you're innocent, knowing that you absolutely did not commit that crime, and being stuck in prison, constantly maintaining your innocence, nobody listening. I mean, I don't think £1 million goes far enough, quite frankly. But these sorts of things are thankfully fairly rare, right, in policing. You don't often get miscarriages of justice in this country, or do you?
Well, I think they're far more common than they ought to be. Let's remember Andy Malkovich, the rapist, not a rapist, who served 17 years for a rape that he did not commit and was released only quite recently after 17 long years. if Peter Sullivan gets £1 million in compensation, and he should, I'm entirely with you. That is utterly insufficient. If Peter came down to my manor to buy a house where prices are ridiculously inflated and bear no resemblance to the value of properties, £1 million won't take him very far after he's bought himself a comfortable 3-bed semi. For 38 years of incarceration, he should be receiving multiples of that amount.
I mean, was it just that actually, look, I mean, clearly he must have been imprisoned on circumstantial evidence alone. And then later on, this DNA sample, which was taken at the time, but my understanding is we didn't really have the tech to do anything about it when it was taken. And the worry was if we started probing it and messing about with it back then, it would have actually harmed the sample taken. And then finally roll the clock forward. Suddenly we can slice and dice it and see if there's any sort of match. Is it now the case that because we have better technology and better equipment in our prosecutions, that hopefully this sort of mistake can't be made again?
Yeah, let me just give you a bit of context from my own experience of a murder that I dealt with in 1985, the year before Diane was murdered. We found a blood-stained jumper, and that blood had been somewhat diluted, and all the scientists could do back then was give us a blood group. There was nothing more than they could do. DNA science simply did not, in forensic terms for policing, did not exist. Fortunately, the exhibits from Diane's brutal murder were retained over the years, so when a sample was eventually taken and discovered, it was analysed, and hence the identity of another man who the police are still searching for, by the way. So if anybody remembers that night in Birkenhead in 1986 and they think they saw or heard anything, or they've seen or heard anything subsequent to that, please get in touch with Merseyside Police. They'd be delighted to hear from you.
And how do you think the police who dealt with this at the time? I mean, they must have been sort of, you know, serving in the police force at the same time as you, but not the same police force. But it must be a huge sort of blow to them to realise they put the wrong man away.
Well, I wonder if any kind of inquiry will be now launched into the false confession, who took it, how it was extracted, and are there any questions that need answering over that?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. And actually, I must admit, I find myself following the Lucy Letby revelations with more and more intrigue, because at the very least, look, I don't know whether she did it or didn't. That's the whole point. But at the very least, you look at it and you suddenly realise, a lot of this evidence does seem circumstantial. Where's the smoking gun?
Well, my boys tell me that my most left-wing leanings come to when we have discussions about capital punishment. Now, I am against the death penalty, which may come as a surprise to some people, for a number of reasons. I think that a lifetime of incarceration is a true life sentence, and we've seen people like Fred Weston, Harold Shipman, and many others who haven't been able to confront that and deal with it, so they've taken their own lives, unfortunately. And I do get all the counter-arguments, by the way. But what I would say is this. It took 40 years or thereabouts for the advances in science to rule Mr. Sullivan's conviction unsafe. In 40 years' time, what will the science be saying about the science of today? Will some of our science that courts rely on, which convictions hang upon, will some of that science be questioned in 40 years' time? I don't have a crystal ball. We simply don't know.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I'm going to continue following that particular case because, well, I mean, more and more things seem to be coming out over the course. And the thing is, the media just all piled on it and went, she's a monster and all the rest of it, front page. The name kind of works well. You remember it because of the double L's. And so there are people out there who've just decided 100% that she is an absolute demon. But I always kind of thought there was something that didn't add up about it. Not that I know anything. She might be the monster and rightfully in prison. Who knows? Right, Peter, thank you ever so much. Always fascinating talking to you. Peter Bleksley, ladies and gentlemen. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere, because guess who's popped up once again? Reared his little big-eared head, and that is Gary Lineker. He put out something on social media that really did upset people. It very much did come across as anti-Semitic, but apparently He's since apologised for it. We're going to be discussing that after this.
I've campaigned to have data in the public domain about the link between immigration and crime. That is now starting to happen. The Home Secretary has finally agreed to it. But I suspect that that will show that there is a serious link between particularly sexual crime and the numbers of people coming in on small boats, because some of these people are coming from countries where the attitudes are frankly alien to those that we have in our own country, particularly towards women. And that is driving crime. And our immigration system should put the interests of the British public first and foremost.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome. Do you know, I keep distracting my tech op, and she's because I'm sort of talking to her and stuff like that. She's not telling me when we're coming back on air. I was just asking for another cup of tea, right? And then she went 3 teas, and I was like, what, Michael Jackson's nephews? And I was like, oh, you're too young to know what that's all about. If you know, you know. Right, now, talking about if you know, you know. Apparently, if you know, you know when it comes to putting out anti-Israel content and including an emoji of a rat, which has become the symbol of anti-Semitism on social media. Well, that is exactly what Gary Lineker did. Although he did plead ignorance over it, saying he hadn't noticed the rat emoji was there. But, you know, he keeps sharing this sort of content, doesn't he? Can't leave it alone rather than just stick to talking about football. He has to wade on into what's going on in Gaza. Some might say stay in your lane, sunshine. But, you know, he has turned around and he's apologised. The former England captain said in a statement earlier today, on Instagram, I reposted material which I've since learned contained offensive references. I very much regret these references. I'd never knowingly share anything anti-Semitic. It goes against everything I believe in. Everything you believe in? The post was removed as soon as I became aware of the issue. While I strongly believe in the importance of speaking out on humanitarian issues, including the tragedy unfolding in Gaza, I also know that how we do so matters. I take full responsibility for this mistake. That image does not reflect my views. It was an error on my part, for which I apologise unreservedly. Well, let's speak to Gary Mond, who's chair of the National Jewish Assembly. Well, he said he didn't see it. He said that he's worried about the humanitarian issue in Gaza, but is definitely not an anti-Semite, and that when someone pointed this out, he deleted it. Is that fair enough?
I think the first point to make is the fundamentals of the problem is that he's allowing politics and sport to actually mix, and that is completely unacceptable. If you have a position like he does as a major football commentator, you should not be indulging in politics whatsoever. And this problem has gone back many years, and really he should be sacked. Today was really the final straw. We already had a big problem with him in 2023 when he actually said that the policies of the then Conservative government were similar to those of Nazi Germany concerning refugees, which was tremendously offensive to every Jew in this country. And now, of course, they're actually looking at comparing Jews to rats, which is exactly what they did in Nazi Germany in the 1930s under Joseph Goebbels and Julius Streicher. It is completely unacceptable. And I accept that this is the first time he has ever apologised. I'm amazed he hasn't apologised for anything in the past. And time will tell whether we see him repeating his offences yet again. I think he should go.
Isn't the problem here as well the fact that, you know, when people engage with this sort of stuff, and especially when they're retweeting content and not thinking this is such a serious issue, because it's not just about the situation in Gaza, it's about the geopolitical situation internationally, it's about the safety of Jews in Europe. And, you know, anybody with half a brain knows that part of what's going on right now is a huge propaganda war. And so surely you should treat these matters with kid gloves. I personally, as somebody who is on television, very rarely retweet someone else or repost something if I don't know the provenance, if I don't know the sentiment or the intention of the person tweeting it, if I can't verify the account it comes from, because one of these days you're going to get in trouble. Now, when it comes to an issue as sensitive as this, where so much of the stuff put out there is from the Hamas, you know, health authority, basically their propaganda arm, where the idea is to hype up anti-Jewish sentiment using October the 7th and what's happened subsequently as the lever by which to do that, that someone in Gary Lineker's position should just think, you know what, I'm going to leave well alone.
Someone in Gary Lineker's position shouldn't be saying anything at all. And I speak as a former international butterfly swimmer over 50 years ago. I always thought it was wrong. I thought it was wrong all my life for sport and politics to be mixed. Gary Lineker should be saying nothing about politics at all. And in the event that Gary Lineker wasn't famous, what he says nobody would would care about at all if he was just yet another Jew hater. But he's Gary Lineker. He's famous for different reasons. That's why people pay attention to him. He should be keeping his mouth and his Twitter shut.
Do you think the BBC, he's apologised now, do you think the BBC should do something about this?
They don't have a good record about doing things about anything concerning anti-Semitism. We're hearing weasel words from Mr. Davey, but we're not actually seeing action, not just on Lineker, but on many other matters as well. So I don't have much confidence in the BBC doing anything about it. My personal view is the law should be changed on the sport and politics matter that I've spoken about. And incidentally, entertainment comes into it as well, as we're witnessing the horrendous attacks on the Israeli contestant in the Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah, did you think there's a bit of a two-tier system, for want of a better phrase, when it comes down to discrimination and what discrimination they just sort of tacitly think is fine and fair, and the other stuff that they don't? Because I think to myself, I think of a particular television star in the form, I think it was Danny Baker, and I hope someone corrects me if I'm wrong, who after the birth of, Archie, put out something ridiculous on social media, showing a picture of a monkey and saying, here's the new prince, or something like that. And he always professed that he didn't even, you know, he's just messing about and didn't actually think at all about what the implications of that might be. But of course, a lot of people read that to be an overtly racist choice of a picture. No one's heard hide nor hair of him ever since. He was gone. he was cancelled. And yet it seems to me that, you know, when you turn on BBC News, they have all sorts of dubious characters, particularly in like BBC Arabia, who have actual connections to Hamas over in Gaza, or will be repeating claims such as, you know, Israel's nuked this hospital when it turns out it was actually, you know, a terrorist organisation who had misfired a rocket. And yet it's almost like a sort of shrug of the shoulders when it comes to anti-Semitism.
Yes, the two-tier disease permeates quite a number of different aspects. The BBC, the police, the judicial system, and Jews in this country are simply getting completely fed up with the fact that they're not being given the same treatment and their situation is not being considered seriously the way other minorities are. And they feel very much that they're second-class citizens. And this is sadly what's prompting quite a lot of Jews to consider leaving the UK.
I was going to ask you about that. I'm glad you've just said that, Gary, because I wanted to ask you, you might not have statistics on this, but you may have sort of an anecdotal story to tell of how many people are now doing that, because I see it as a major societal red flag. When the Jews in your country decide it's so bad they're going to get up and actually leave, then you really do have a problem.
What I can tell you is there are two age groups that are particularly badly affected. There's those at the very beginning of their careers, generally those who are either about to go to university or just finishing university, who have witnessed the horrendous anti-Semitism and are saying to themselves, this is no country for me at all to make my life in. The other end of the other type of person who are considering leaving tend to be the older generation. Those who don't feel they're physically safe anymore in this country. I'm thinking of those over 60 who've just retired. They're thinking of going to America, to Israel, or elsewhere where they think they're going to be physically safe, much more so than in this country. We haven't yet had a murder yet of a Jewish person, but I'm very, very fearful as to the future in that regard, because the violence is partly generated by these horrendous hate marches that we see regularly mounted by the so-called pro-Palestinian groups. This is what's frightening people. And as I said, the anecdote I would say to you is those two different age groups are the most likely to want to go.
Yeah, you know, Gary, I find it all deeply worrying indeed. And like I said, it's a major societal red flag when you suddenly find that a community who you should be wrapping your arms around and protecting is saying, we don't want to live here anymore. It's a terrible reflection on what's going on in your country. Gary Mond, Chair of the National Jewish Assembly, thank you ever so much for joining me. Right, don't go anywhere. After the break, we're going to be diving into the top stories of the day with the one and only Benedict Spence. See you after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back to the show. This is Alex Phillips sitting in for Jeremy Carl. I'm with you until 7 o'clock today, and I'll be back again in the drive time hot seat tomorrow. I can't wait, actually. It's a nice time of day to be sitting doing work. You know, you don't have to get up crack of dawn, go out for dinner afterwards. Jeremy does not know how easy he has it. Keep your messages coming in on all the things that we've been talking about today. The numbers are on the screen. If you are watching, if you are listening, jot this down, would you? 0344 499 1000. It's the most important number. Save it to your phone. You can use it to phone the studios and be patched through to speak to me in person, or you can save it to use as a WhatsApp message to the studios to let me know what you think about all of the stories we've been discussing today. Dean in Oxford says, evening Alex, Lineker should apologise to those Jewish footballers past and present that play in the Premier League and other divisions in England. Utter disgrace. Well, some would say he has actually put out a statement of apology, which he normally doesn't do. I live just outside of Leicester, says Mo. We are officially the minority in our own country. Even the white people are mostly Eastern European. You don't hear a lot of English spoken in the town centre anymore. I was reading a brilliant article, I think it was in the Daily Mail, looking at the demographics of some of the suburbs from Leicester, and Leicester's particularly affected. Has for a long time been a diverse city. It had a lot of people coming over to work in the fabric trade over there, people coming from Pakistan. Of course, it's always been home to a fantastic Hindu community, and it has Diwali lights and all the rest of it. But I was reading that the demographics have changed so much, and particularly now lots of people coming in from countries such as Somalia, and they're just not integrating. Shame, Leicester, when you think about it, once upon a time, you know, Richard III under that car park, one of the great cities of this here country. Let's speak to James, who is, talking about some of my favourite parts of the UK. I think this probably has to be in my top 2 after Gloucestershire. It's the New Forest. Let's speak to James. Hi, James.
Hello there, how are you?
I'm super well. Whereabouts are you in the New Forest?
Near Cadnam, if you know where that is.
I do. I love the New Forest. You know, if no one's been to the New Forest, don't ruin it by going and overcrowding it. But it really is Narnia. Like, you can't believe it. If you've never been before, the first time you go, you're like, this is absolutely incredible. The horses everywhere, but it's not just horses. Everyone's farm animals just out there, like, roaming around, making the place look nice. I adore the New Forest. What a lucky man you are to live there. But I'm sure that you didn't phone up to be part of the New Forest Tourist Board. What is on your mind, James?
Hi, earlier on today you mentioned about the lack of nurses and the fact that so many foreigners come along, be nurses, and then they're disappearing back off again. The problem we've got with nursing is that we don't employ enough of our own, or encourage enough of our own people to be in. The way I could see we could get around this is, at the moment, nurses and paramedics get a £5,000 grant a year to help towards their university degree. That's just not enough. If we made it, argument's sake, £15,000 grant, plus no university fees, but at the end of their training they would have to provide at least 5 years worth of work for the NHS. Otherwise, they would have to pay back their uni fees and their grants. We would attract so many people to become nurses that at the moment would like to, but just can't afford to do so.
Yeah, to me, it's absolutely mad. People have to do a degree to be a nurse. I mean, surely it's one of those practical professions that you could just as easily learn on the job, work your way up through the ranks. I think the biggest problem is, I mean, first of all, why on earth are nurses having to pay to park in hospital car parks? That is an absolute madness. That is a disgrace. That needs to go 100%. But also, we were speaking earlier with Candice Holdsworth, and I was saying, if we could just get on top of having the highest energy costs in the world, it frees up a lot more money to pay wages.
That's right. And also, with the nurses that do come, some of them will probably be bringing their families over, which is going to also be a burden on our state and any benefits they might accrue during that time. We just need to train our own. I'm pretty sure there's so many girls out there, in particular, because it's mostly women that want to be nurses. We could go back down the route like they used to, having state-enrolled nurses and state-registered nurses. We don't all have to be super-duper nurses with the degrees, like you just said. And that way, if the hospitals were training their own nurses on site, they'll be getting the staff levels that they want, and it's cheaper for them and everyone else, including us taxpayers.
Do you know what I think we could do? In the same way that when good old ITV wades in and makes some sort of drama about something, it has this knock-on effect of raising public awareness and sort of changing people's moods. I'm pretty sure that certain series, like, you know, cool cop dramas, might have encouraged some people to think, I want to join the police force. That looks like a really sort of exhilarating and special job. Probably find out they get into that job and it's a lot of pen pushing and paperwork and it's not really what you want to do. I think that we could do with ITV making a good old drama about how much fun nursing is, and then people would be like, I could do that. That looks nice. The camaraderie, the reward, getting to know your patients, caring for people, because there's too much doom and gloom. Frankly, if I didn't know any better, I'd think I wouldn't want to go work in the medical profession, because all you hear is it's underpaid, this, not enough, you know, people on wards. You know, it's just always so negative. It did everything so negative in this country. It completely puts people off doing anything, quite frankly. That was James in the New Forest. Thank you ever so much. I'm delighted to say now we are joined by one of my besties. It is Benedict Spence. Hello, Benedict.
Assalamu alaikum, Alex. How are you?
Nice. I was going to say good choice of words.
Topical.
Yeah, topical choice of words. Now, story I have yet to cover today because I've been saving it up to speak to you about, because it is just really up your street and up mine as well, is the David Lammy story. Now, for those people who are not familiar with it, and there's only so much we can say because we don't know who's right and who's wrong here. He's been accused of refusing to pay a 590 quid taxi fare in France. The driver alleges that Lammy became aggressive and refused to pay the bill. In return, the driver drove off with all of his stuff, including his ministerial coded briefcase, his diplomatic passports, him and his wife's luggage. The foreign officer said, actually, no, Lammy was the victim. He had already paid up front what the fare should be, and the driver, in fact, was a thief. But you know what? I don't know who's right and who's wrong in all this. What's weird was that Lammy started off having some sort of proper, you know, something to do in the line of duty in Italy, and then him and his wife decide they want to go to a French ski resort and get a taxi all the way there. I once had a situation where I flew into Geneva, was going to go rent a car, and they didn't allow me to rent a car because I didn't have a credit card. Actually, I thought I could just pay a deposit on my debit card for the insurance, but oh, no, they wouldn't let me have the car at all. So I ended up having to get a taxi from Geneva all the way to Chamonix, and it cost €400. Well, I had to lump it. I had to pay it. Something about this story makes me think, actually, that the taxi driver might not be telling porky pies. What's your reaction to this?
Well, I mean, one doesn't want to sound as if one jumps to conclusions about our continental friends and some of the taxi services that they occasionally provide. But I did initially think, you know, it is conceivable that David Lammy might be telling the truth. However, at the same time, when you do consider those sort of distances that are involved, that is not a cheap taxi journey at all. And lots of us have, experienced that kind of situation where you need that sort of transfer, as it were, from the airport to somewhere, and the prices can be absolutely eye-watering. You know, you can have it the other way as well. You go some places, for instance, Turkey, and you feel, if anything, that you might have actually robbed the taxi driver because everything's a lot cheaper. But, you know, these are the times we live in. You know, electricity, power, petrol, all of these things are very, very expensive. Cars are very difficult to run, very expensive to run. If you're carrying a lot of luggage, you know, you're asking an awful lot of a taxi driver who's having to sort of take it in and out, especially if it's very icy. You know, health and safety, have to take all of these concerns. Ultimately, it's quite a funny story. It's quite a funny story to think, government minister in a bit of bother, you know, overseas in Europe, has been left slightly to his own devices because a taxi driver's driven off with all of his stuff. There is obviously the serious point to it as well, though, which is that he is the foreign secretary and he could have had anything, actually, that the taxi driver's driven off with. Hopefully, nothing too serious.
But even then, there's something that doesn't, you know, there's got to be some sort of blame on Lammy's side. Because if you've had a shouting match with a taxi driver enough that they've driven off with your, you know, ministerial briefcase and your diplomatic passport, you might not have been handling that as sensibly as you could. You'd think if you are the foreign secretary for a nation, you would be able to phone someone up and say, I'm in a car with a taxi driver, this is his number plate, he's a wrong 'un. Rather than he being the one who goes to the police station and blaming it on you.
Possibly. Although, again, you know, our Gallic cousins are not known for their diplomacy necessarily, even if you'd hope that David Lammy would be very good at it. But, you know, it's another sort of just very embarrassing episode, I think, in David Lammy's career, not necessarily for professional reasons. We all know, of course, the sort of the faux pas and the slips of the tongue, the time when he was stood in front of a television camera and he said, "I haven't seen a single policeman here," as a police officer was walking immediately behind him, or the time during the last papal conclave when somebody said, "Well, will it be white smoke or black?" And David Lammy thought that this was some sort of racist reference to whether or not the Pope would be an African. He does sort of seem to, I don't want to make it sound as if he's a cartoon character. He's not, obviously, but he does seem to get himself into these sort of these easily avoided scrapes, I would have thought. These sort of situations that most people, if you were looking from the outside, go, it's a bit odd that you keep on finding yourself in this situation, and it's just that little bit worse that he's a government minister.
Yeah, no, it is exactly that, isn't it? It's like, here we go again, something connected to David Lammy. Not to say he's done anything wrong with this. It might be an absolute ne'er-do-well of a taxi driver trying to pull a fast one, and then taking himself off to the police when he realises quite who he's tried to pull a fast one with to sort of clear his own name first. We don't know what's gone on here, but you just think you shouldn't be in a position where this sort of thing is happening in the first place. No. While I got you, let's talk about that immigration white paper that the Home Secretary has put out. There's some detail in there, some stuff perhaps to be applauded. A lot of it to me seems like hot air and bump. What did you make of it?
I mean, that's the issue, really, isn't it? Is it going to be, and from what follows on from this white paper, which I agree, put it this way, it's a lot more than I ever anticipated from a Labour government. I would say that much. The Overton window is clearly, even for the government, is shifting. Though I think the true Overton window has shifted a lot further. Not is shifting, has shifted. And I think a lot of Westminster, very out of touch, is only really beginning to wake up to just how much the conversations around migration have already shifted and are not coming back. There's no way, I think, of sort of, trying to massage the figures or, say, oh, this is good for the economy, we need these people to do this specific role. No, I think that covenant with the public has been shattered. I think it could obviously go a lot further. I do still think residually in the background of this government, there's the sense that if you just spin hard enough, you'll be able to get away with it and you won't have to do the heavy lifting. I think there's an element of that, but I do also think that they're looking at the polling, they're looking at the performance of the economy, they're looking at all the metrics, and they're going, guys, I don't think we can spin our way out of this one. The problem is, as I say, the public discourse has shifted a lot further than the government has, even with its relatively small number of announcements. And it's curious because Nigel Farage obviously said in the aftermath of Keir Starmer's speech, he thought that Starmer might have made a mistake. I think it's a bit of a difficult moment, not just for Starmer, but also potentially for Farage, because I think Starmer can't actually move far enough in that direction because half of his party will eat him alive. But he also needs to move in that direction in order to survive. But then that, I'm afraid, really does sort of land the ball in Farage's court, where very quickly you're going, well, are you going to be the one that steps up and does this? Or has the Overton window, in fact, already shifted even further than what you're comfortable with? And this was always the problem and has always been the problem with everything in this country. If you just wait and hope that the problem disappears, before you know it, like a runaway train, it'll be out of your control. And this is, I think, it's a major problem for Labour. I don't think that they can solve it. I don't think they want to solve it necessarily. But I think it's also a problem with reform. Before you know it, they really could be the ones with this dumped into their lap because Labour, fumbled it so hard and the Tories aren't coming back at the moment. How do you deal with that situation where you, in fact, are the moderates in that situation?
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating point you make by that. When it comes to Nigel and his comments, anyone who knows Nigel has read any of his books or the sort of unofficial biographies of him know that when he was at school, he once had to take Enoch Powell to a train station and really liked him. And I have a feeling that Nigel knew what he was doing when he said, I think he was just throwing accelerant onto something because he knows it's going to give Sir Keir Starmer a massive headache. But what is the opposite of the Overton window when it goes in the opposite direction? Because this whole offence about saying island of strangers, to me, is absolutely crazy. You wake up every morning and, someone's taken offence at something, something's taboo, you can't say that, that's unkind, you shouldn't have used those words. I mean, grow up, it's just words, we need to use them. But I really have to stretch myself to even remotely begin to understand why anyone could take umbrage at suggesting that we don't want to be an island of strangers.
Yeah, I think, again, when we discuss the Overton window and the shift that has already happened. I think there are still some bastions of society that are holding out and holding on to the idea of offence and wokeness, and you can't say X, Y, Z. You know, things like the BBC, up until a certain point, certain members of the media class, certain journalists, certain newspapers will cling really strongly to this. Some professions will as well. You'll see this in certain echelons of the NHS and also the education sector. They will hold on to this idea still that there are things beyond the pale that cannot be said, and that anything that you say, even approaching certain subjects, is that Guardian Easter expression, the far right on the march again. But as I say, I think the shift has already come and gone, and I think those people are living in a time that was relevant 5 years ago. Every time we have any sort of conversation around migration in this country, immediately the same old people start talking about Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. And
it was
the way
5
they talk
decades ago. I mean, for
the way they
God's
talk
sakes.
about it. The way they talk about it, it's almost like a sort of a Goldstein figure from 1984. It's not what's in it that matters. It's that you're supposed to hate the concept. You know, that is in fact what it is. And it's very clear that nobody who ever sort of brings it up in that context as a way of shutting down debate, they very clearly haven't read it. And this is always what I think. If people paid a little bit more attention to the things that were, say, in that speech, if they could name the river in question, that would be a great start. But if they, paid attention to what was actually in the speech, they'd recognise we have shifted so much further than what even he predicted. That isn't to say, that everything that he said in the speech was great. It was done in a very incendiary manner, deliberately so, to catch attention. It worked. But, just saying, it's this, and this is bad, doesn't mean that the trajectory is just going to halt. It's already on its way there. And I think it's a sign of how out of ideas, as well as out of touch, people are when they just reach for the nearest sort of boogeyman and they go, well, you can't say that because of this boogeyman.
But they create these boogeymans deliberately, don't they? I mean, it's sort of like they have to create societal shame or demonisation. At one point, leaving the EU, which is a trading bloc, was fruitcakes, lunatics and closet racists. No, we don't want someone who's not elected to be deciding what happens in this country. It is a very simple concept to understand. But that was dangerous, and Brexiteers are evil and far right. And, I'm so sick to death with the whole argument about language, and especially, actually, just going to ask you something very quickly before I let you go.
Sure.
The assisted dying bill, I mean, I'm kind of glad that it's hit hurdles. It needs to. The bill it is so important. And it's so important to get it right with the correct checks and balances that, when Royal College of Psychiatrists are saying we cannot go any further with this, right, these things need to be called out. But I'm worried about the language in that debate, not because it's hurty and offensive, but because of something that's so important when all we're told is dignity in dying. We're not using adult language. We're not actually saying what this means, which I understand the concept of dignity in dying. I actually stand for that. I think it's really important and think more money needs to go into hospices. But it will be the first time in a very long time in this country where we will have it state-sanctioned, a legal act allowing somebody to be killed.
Yeah. I am opposed to it in the same way that I'm opposed to the death penalty. Even though every now and then a case comes along where I think, wow, that person deserves death, I then remember who it is that would be administering it. And this is the state that, manages to lock in the case of the gentleman, Mr. Sullivan, who was just released after 38 years for a murder that he didn't commit. He almost certainly would have been executed by the state. I don't trust this state to get these things right. And if I don't trust it to get high-profile murder cases right and to put people to death, why on earth would I trust it for millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people with dementia or cancer? Because that's what it will lead to. Right now it's being sort of framed as, very rare, painful genetic disease, all that sort of thing. What it will mean is everybody who is in the latter stages of their life will basically be given the option and eventually cajoled into this sort of thing. And it will be framed, you were talking there about childish language, it will also be framed through language, helping the NHS, doing your bit for society, making sure that you aren't contributing to the suffering of your children and your grandchildren. You can imagine how that will happen. Right. And as I say, I oppose to it because I know that that's what's going to happen.
And I think we need an adult conversation. And I think that as uncomfortable as it may sound, you've got to have discomfort in this debate because it is so crucial that if it's going to happen, it's done right. Thank you ever so much. The wonderful Benedict Spence. Right, we're going to go for a break now, and we've got a treat lined up for you after the break. That's right. Well, you are going to be part of the treat. That's correct. We're going to be taking your calls. 03444991000 is the number to dial if you want to get involved. But then I'm going to be joined by my old TV husband, Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan. That's after this.
I've campaigned to have data in the public domain about the link between immigration and crime. That is now starting to happen. The Home Secretary has finally agreed to it. But I suspect that that will show that there is a serious link between particularly sexual crime and the numbers of people coming in on small boats, because some of these people are coming from countries where the attitudes are frankly alien to those that we have in our own country, particularly towards women, and that is driving crime. And our immigration system should put the interests of the British public first and foremost.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back. Right, let's go straight to the phone lines and speak to David, who is in Birmingham. Hi there, David.
Hello there, Alex. I just thought I'd run something by you.
Yeah?
I think we can all agree that Gary Lineker was a great footballer, is a great pundit, a great commentator, a great presentator. But what I would say, and something that I've noticed is, he keeps making all these espousing for the BBC and different political views and everything else. He doesn't need to do that. Why is he doing it? Is that part of his agreement with the BBC? Is he being remunerated for it? Is it being used as a mouthpiece? Because he really doesn't need to actually do those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, but he also did this, didn't he, over Brexit, and he did this over immigration policy. And the reason is, when people are sort of on the left wing and the middle-class left wing, you know, the sort of metropolitan elites who sit around dinner parties and go, oh, isn't it terrible? Nigel Farage is doing so well, and oh, I'm so worried for the sake of the country. They're doing it because it's a bit like comparing Gucci handbags. These are luxury ideologies. They do it because it makes them think it makes them look kind of nice, because they're in a position. The thing is, the middle classes, and I don't mean all middle classes, I am the middle class, do you know what I mean? But a lot of people have got, who live in very comfortable existences are not on the sharp end of these things. They're not living in neighbourhoods that have people firing fireworks at, god-awful hours of the morning in support of Palestine. They're not the people who are, having to face wage compression or rubbish being dumped in the streets. Their lives are protected from all of this. So they get to adopt this ideology because they're not going to be impacted by it. And so they use it a bit like comparing, what fancy holiday you've just been on. That's my view.
Sure, but I don't think he needs to do it, and that's my point.
He doesn't.
He gets paid well enough, and so forth, and he's got his reputation and everything else. I just think that he's part of the BBC. He's part of the BBC propaganda.
Well, I doubt the BBC have said to me, Gary, send out this social media post, would you? But they don't seem to do enough to curtail it, that's for sure. Exactly. David, thank you ever so much for your call. That was David in Birmingham. Let's do some of your messages now before we wait for His Majesty Kevin of O'Sullivan to join me in the studio. Layla has messaged, "Hi Alex, I'm so worried about the assisted dying bill. I'd never want anyone to suffer at all, but I worry it could become a slippery slope where the right to die gradually becomes an expectation to die in certain circumstances, undermining the importance of providing compassionate care and support." This is the thing. Hospices have to get about 3/4 of the money they need just to open their doors and run from the charity sector. Not from us, not from the taxpayer, not from the government. We're talking about the very places, the institutions that give people towards the end of their lives comfort and dignity and company and fortitude. If we can't put money and put the right facilities in place in hospices, which have been drastically affected as well by the rise of employers' national insurance, then what on earth is... There he goes, right in front of the camera.
I'll do that every day.
He didn't care, did he? No, we will wait for him to plug himself in. But no, I just think it's... I'm worried about it. Here he is.
You've been out in the sun, haven't you?
Why am I looking red?
Well, you're looking suntanned.
I'm looking suntanned. I think I'm having a bit of an eczema flare-up as well.
Oh, really?
Of that.
What, exacerbated by the sun?
Exacerbated. No, the sun usually helps. It just exacerbated by life. Only got about 50 seconds left.
Well, anyway, I'll just tell you what's going to be the fun bit of the show.
Go on then.
It'll be very short.